Thank you. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brookline
Recording in progress.
Get to do continue. Do we all have to do that? For August 17th, 2021. This is not a scheduled meeting, but it's one that we felt we needed to have as we approach the school reopening. So much of our work tonight will be about school reopening and making sure we are ready to welcome our students and our staff. So with that, we'll begin with administrative business and the consent agenda. Do I have a motion to approve that? Thank you, Stephen. Do I have a second? Thank you, David. David, welcome. We didn't see you for just a minute. Any comments or questions before we vote? I would just like to say thank you to the family of Sylvia Davis, who is putting together this memorial scholarship. Sylvia is the grandmother of several family members who have put this scholarship together. It is a scholarship to be given to a female student majoring in the arts. And Sylvia Davis was a pioneer in the public television and a leading influence at WGBH. So thank you to the family for this. We appreciate it. All three of Sylvia's children went to Brookline High. So she lived here for a number of years. With that, we'll go right on into a vote for the consent agenda. Stephen?
Yes.
David?
Yes.
Helen?
Yes.
Andy?
Yes.
Susan?
Yes.
Mariah?
Yes.
Val?
Abstain.
Okay. And let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And I vote yes as well. Okay, thank you. We're now going to public comment. I believe we have one speaker. Is that right, Robin? John Van Scoyac?
That's correct.
So if you put John on, we will be happy to listen to him for a couple of minutes. Hi, John, welcome.
Hey,
Hey, John, welcome.
how are you?
That's fine. Go right ahead.
Thank you very much for the invitation to speak. And Helen will, this will sound familiar to her and to a couple of the other members because I said it at the school capital subcommittee meeting. But I just want the school committee to know that I, for one, and I'm only speaking for myself, would love to see the school committee take a leadership position insofar as the proposed addition of ground source heat pumps to the Driscoll project. And, you know, by leadership position, I mean simply this, that it won't be possible within the current time frame in the immediate future to say, yes, we can say for sure which part of the federal money coming our way we will be able to use for this. And it won't be possible to know exactly how this measures against other possible uses of the funding coming our way for other energy efficiencies. And it won't be possible to know for sure what the long-term payback is on this project. But I think what we do know for certain is that we are entering into a new era in which the federal government is taking the leadership in trying to invite and encourage and spur at the local level some dramatic steps forward insofar as addressing the crisis of climate change. And this opportunity is there now. The school committee needs to make a decision soon because the building project will go forward and the opportunity to do the ground source geothermal at some point will be lost. And I think it would be, a very unfortunate circumstance if in fact it was lost. And I say that in this respect. This new Driscoll building will be a great place of learning for kids, but the building itself will be teaching the kids something about the urgency of addressing climate change. And a building with geothermal sends the right message to the kids, and a building that represents a lost opportunity sends the wrong message to the kids. And so, as I say, I'm only speaking for myself. I can promise you this much, that if you decide that you as a school committee wish to put a priority on this for the Driscoll School, I will do everything I can to make sure that the select board sees the wisdom of that decision and agrees in that decision and works with you as to the actual details of, which of the many pots of money that are being put forward in the post-COVID period, this project can draw on. But it is the right decision to make, and this is the time to make it. And I just wanted you to know I feel rather urgently about it, and I wanted to convey that to you tonight.
Thank you, John. I appreciate your thoughts. Okay, so that ends public comment for tonight. I didn't know, since I missed the last committee meeting, I didn't know if Taisha has been introduced to the school committee. Was that done before, or should we do that now?
We can do that now. That was one of the reasons I asked the senior team to pop in tonight so that we can see all of them and welcome them. So you want me to take the lead on that, or would you like to?
No, I would like you to, if you would, please. Yeah, because Janae's in a new role, a new position in senior leadership. So I think it'd be great if you could just introduce us to them.
All right. And so I'll start and just work around for the millions and millions that are watching this or will watch this at some point. I'll start and just work around the screen. We are excited to have Casey No Miller return in the role of Deputy Superintendent of the Office of Student Support. Casey, you want to say hi to the folks?
Sure, happy to be back, and good to see everybody.
Awesome. Next on my screen is Janae. Janae is joining us as the Senior Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. We're including all of those in the title. So Janae, you want to say hi to the folks?
Sure, of course. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for this time. It's good to see everybody. I'm thrilled to be working with the senior team in this role. So thank you.
All right. And next we have Erin Cooley, who's continuing or finishing out the role of Senior Director of Strategy. I think she started in this role with Dr. Marini, so she's continuing in that role. So Erin, you want to say hi to the folks?
Sure. Hi, everybody. Happy to be back and looking forward to the school year.
Awesome. And next on my screen, we have Miss Taisha Fluker. Ty, you want to say hi? Ty is our Senior Director of Human Resources, and she joins us most recently from the Boston Public Schools.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be in Brookline, and I look forward to working with all of you.
And next on my screen, I see Leslie Ryan Miller. Leslie is joining us as the Deputy Superintendent in Teaching and Learning.
Good evening, everybody. Good to see everyone. Hope all is well. It's been an interesting couple of weeks and we're getting ready for the school year, but I'm confident that we're going to have a good one. So looking forward to our work together this year.
And then I think at some point, Sam is going to join us, and you all, I think, have already met Sam. He participated in our workshop back in July, with the exception of Val. You'll have the opportunity, I think, to see him tonight, Val. And then also want to just thank and acknowledge the presence of, I think I see Megan and Matt, who are part of the Brookline team. They're here tonight as well, and we'll hear from them, I think, shortly. So with that, Suzanne, I'll pass the mic back to you.
Thank you so much, Linus. And of course, welcome to you. I know you've been here now a month, maybe, I don't know, but you've got a great senior team. I'm really excited for the year ahead, for sure. Okay, we're going to talk about really current issues, getting ready for the reopening of school. And we're going to start with our enrollment update. So I believe Megan and Erin, you're going to take the show on the road for this.
Thanks so much, Suzanne. I have a presentation, so I'm going to see if I can share that for you so you can follow along. Let's see if I can move my Zoom screen. So this is just a nice opportunity for us to take a little temperature check on where things are at currently. As I always like to remind everybody, the enrollment numbers that I present today will change tomorrow. In fact, these are from Sunday evening, so they've already changed since I've prepared this, but it was a nice static moment to take a little snapshot for everybody. So first of all, this slide here shows us the overall enrollment for where we're at district-wide, pre-K to 12 plus, including all of our students, and how they are distributed across the different schools and grade levels. At the moment, we have 6,930 students fully enrolled in our district and ready to join us for September. We are seeing lots of kids still expressing interest, and there will of course still be movement amongst our schools as families move around town, as they are want to do quite a lot. This is a very busy time in real estate here in town as well, so don't get too attached to the specific numbers, but it's a good overall general assessment of where things are at. And this does include all of our pre-registered students, our materials fee students, our METCO students, and the ones that we know about who have transferred around since last year, or also who have withdrawn. So I thought it would be a really nice opportunity to also share with everybody the average sizes in our classes, especially in our K to 8s. The high school always looks a bit different. So our goal, our target, if you will, that we were talking about all last spring as we were building our classes, was to make sure to have our kindergarten sections try to be no larger than 20, and the upper grade levels really no higher than 21. And right now we're right on track to do that. Our elementary sections, our early elementary sections, are at a nice 17 with plenty of room to grow, and you'll see that that is a good thing where we stand right now. And our middle school sections are slightly larger, but not markedly so, still happily within that sweet spot that we're aiming to keep our student and teacher equity ratio nice and spread out. And then in terms of the way things look between this year compared to last year, you'll be able to see some of the shifts in how we're distributing the sections across the schools based on the grade levels. And I'll just make a specific point here that the 2020-21 numbers in the right-hand column are based on the way that we had sections distributed at this exact same time last year, which was before we opened the Remote Learning Academy and expanded all of the sections to accommodate 6-foot distancing. So this is much more of an apples to apples comparison of how we anticipated distributing our sections last year to how we are this year. And the color coding, and you'll see this again also on the next slide, is to distribute, show you the progression of cohorts, right? So the kindergarten that is in blue for 2020-21 is now our 2021-22 first grade section, and so on. The majority of our sections have either stayed the same or decreased slightly to reflect some of the losses that we've seen in enrollment between the COVID situation and The only difference is that you'll see our current first grade section has in fact increased because we have a higher demand for our first graders who are returning back to us here for next year. And here you'll be able to see a bit more about sort of a trajectory, overall trajectory of our grade levels from last year to this year. So that middle column that's in gray reflects, again, that's that snapshot of where we were at the same time last year, what we would have thought of, what we thought was going to be our enrollment at this time moving into the beginning of the year. But obviously we did see quite a significant change about a week or two following this date. So the really helpful number probably is our October 1 SIMS numbers, which you can see in the right-hand column. And again, that color coding again shows you that cohort survival growth rate. So you can see that grade 1 section, it's the largest rebound in a single grade. And 28 of those first graders are re-entering PSB from local private kindergarten programs. Schools like St. Mary's or some of the private preschools that opened kindergarten programs during COVID. Those are students who have now returned to PSB, in addition to all the students that come from outside Brookline who are new to town and new to the community. And then as far as kindergarten redshirting, because this is always a question we have 14 students who are technically age eligible for grade 1 who are going to be entering PSB for kindergarten. A good handful of those were students who were with us in BEEP. And so these were conversations that had been long had with our educators and were in the best interest of the students. And then the remainder of them were all born in late August, and most of them had also been in touch with PSB prior to enrollment for last year, discussing their intentions for whether their children were ready for kindergarten last year, and they decided that they would wait a year. So none of these were actually specifically COVID red shirts. They were conversations that had been in place prior to all of the changes. And again, you can see that the totals here are going to look a little different from that first slide. And that is because this slide is presenting kindergarten through grade 12. Our pre-K program is a little bit more proscribed in terms of our enrollment. You know, we are basically told how many students we may have based on the number of classrooms available. And our 12+ cohort is also a little bit more proscribed. Those are the students only who are eligible for that program, who remain with us. So this is just a little snapshot of our kindergarten through 12th grade program at the moment. So in addition to all those kiddos, the 6,930, we are very busy in the Office of Registration and Enrollment this month and last month. We are scrambling to welcome all kinds of new families. At the moment, I have 135 students who have submitted applications for enrollment. We have not enrolled these folks yet. They have not had their residency verification vetted through our office yet. They may or may not have scheduled appointments. They may or may not have finalized their moves here to Brookline also. But the majority of these folks are very, very likely to end up enrolled in PSB, and certainly before October 1. So some of those folks might not land there for the first day of school, but they are very, very likely to be there by October 1 for the most part. And this number will continue to grow probably over the next week as well. Every time I put a new kid in, I get a new application submitted from a new family. And so you can see the demand is quite high in kindergarten and even still through those early elementary grades. And the tapers, for some reason, 6th grade is just not very popular this year at the moment. And then our high school demand has been steadily chugging along with 6 to 8 kids at a time in each grade level 12th grade is a little less popular as well. Okay, so those are that's sort of our little snapshot for where we're at currently. See if I can help you with any particulars that you might have interest in.
Yeah, I'll kick it off if it's okay, Megan, and we'll go to questions. Just, are you starting to see any movement from our international families? Are they coming in or not yet? I'm just curious.
Yes, so we are seeing some movement from our international families, although it's not as evenly distributed as we would have seen in a year like 2019. There are still some travel restrictions for some countries, and that's constantly in flux. We have seen quite a number of families arriving in the last few weeks from Israel, which is wonderful to see those families coming back to Brookline and able to join our school community again after sort of a year of families taking a pause on the opportunities to come here. And we're also seeing lots of families from Japan and South Korea as well. But some of our other countries, it's a little less even, and the travel is very, we're seeing inquiries from families in other places, certainly. I also have like a very fun bumper crop of Dutch families, just for fun. So it's a little all over the place. But I don't think we've seen the full brunt of our families who wish to come and intend to come. Visas in and out of the US are slow to be processed right now, especially for places even like the UK. So it's a little up and down.
Thank you, Megan. Helen, did you have a comment or question?
You asked it already.
Oh, okay, okay. Other comments or questions? Yeah, Stephen.
Thanks for that presentation. In the packet prior to this meeting, there was a breakdown of schools by grades and sections, and some of those sections were highlighted, presumably because they were on the threshold of what we thought was an acceptable number of students. Did you want to address that at all in this presentation, or is that coming up in some further presentation?
So, I mean, I'm happy to sort of touch on that. If you're looking at that elementary sections report,
Right.
You can see that the majority of the ones that are highlighted do fall within our middle school cohorts. And so the quote unquote threshold of 21 was sort of a budgetary discussion, I believe, and Erin can probably clarify that if I've got that mistaken. But that was a budgetary discussion. Our middle school sections have always been considered to be able to stretch a little bit further because the structure of the way we do our middle school program is a little different than our K-5, where the kids are strictly in one place at a time. So historically and to this day, you know, if we're reaching 21, it's not a big deal. If it was something closer to 24, then we would really be in a state of, we'd still be able to handle it, of course, but it would be less than our preferred ideal. But all of our elementary sections are under 20, which is great.
Can I just follow up on that, Suzanne? Do you mind addressing whether we're planning on adding additional sections or where you anticipate adding sections? I'm asking in part because we received a letter from parents of one school who were concerned about about a section being reduced. It seems to have been added back in this in the chart that you distributed, but there also seem like there's a couple of grades and sections that are right on the bubble right now. Given that there are some open enrollments, should we be expecting that the additional sections would be added, and we'll have to be looking at the budget for those additional costs as well?
So I will defer to Erin and Dr. Guillory on decisions about opening sections, as those are financial decisions and staffing concerns.
Yeah, so we can talk a little bit about, I believe the school that you're referencing is probably Driscoll grade 3, and Dr.
Lawrence grade 7 and Driscoll, Driscoll kindergarten, and a bunch of Ridley too.
Well, we did, Dr. Guillory did have the conversation with Principal Euclid yesterday, and looking at their numbers and their staffing, we did decide to open that additional section for grade 3 in Driscoll. And these are conversations we're having weekly, sometimes more than once a week, and looking at the numbers that Megan and her team are enrolling and bringing to us, and looking at staffing that we have available at particular schools and in particular grade levels. Similar to what Megan said, these are obviously budgetary decisions as well. And so when we hit a number that pushes us over that 20, 21 mark in the elementary grades, and then potentially a little bit higher in the middle school grades, that's when we're really digging a little bit deeper with the school leader to see if there's space, if there's staff, and what we can do in that particular school in that particular grade.
Okay.
So as Megan said, these are not final. They will be different at the end of this week than they were at the end of last week on Sunday when she updated these numbers. So always updating and thinking through these sections at each individual school.
Okay, thank you.
Helen?
Yeah, one thing too to keep in mind, Stephen, what happens oftentimes is parents sometimes leave the schools but don't tell us. So we have to be very careful in terms of how we look at the numbers. That's why we use October 1st as the date, because by that time you can usually, figure out who's actually in the class. And especially this year, I think it'll be very important. Many parents may have gone back to other countries and not told us, or moved to a different district. And so I think those are things we need to keep in mind also.
I really appreciate you saying that. I haven't seen this process all the way through before. I should say I'm also asking in part because several parents have said to me that they are very interested in the class sizes in part because of their fears of COVID. So I want to make sure that I have a full understanding of how we're making decisions relating to adding other sections if necessary. Like Erin, I forgot to mention that Runkle seemed like it was in the negatives in terms of being over our minimum class amount. I mean, that's really to the administration, and if there's a way that the school board can be supportive in this, I would love to do that. But I also just want to make sure I have an accurate understanding of how decision making.
Right. And the other thing the other tool that the superintendent, Erin, and others have is to use the buffer zones with these new children who aren't attached to a school. And that has worked out very effectively many times in terms of trying to not have to open another section and have classes of 15, which I don't think we can afford right now.
Thank you, Helen, for that. Thank you, Stephen, for those questions. Other concerns, comments, questions?
I see Mariah's hand, Susan.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mariah, go right ahead.
Thank you. My question, I have two questions actually. The first one is, as Helen just mentioned, classes of 15. And so for the case of Driscoll, what are the class sizes in that? If you've opened up the third section, aren't they at like 14 kids or something?
So that third grade section currently
15.
sits at 15, but I also have additional students in the queue that I'm aware of that'll bump that up to 16, and we need to have some space for growth. So it's better for it to be about 16, 17 than 23 or 24, especially at that third grade level.
And then, okay, thanks, Megan. And then my next question is, at the end of, as we were budgeting for FY22, hang on one moment, please. As we were budgeting for FY22, we had held some positions in abeyance, waiting to see where, mostly thinking they were for kindergarten. And I guess my question really is, overall, are we at our FTEs or below or above our FTEs that we had budgeted for at this time?
So I think Sam probably could answer that question better than I could, but in looking at the sheet that you all have access to, I believe that we are at that point. So we have used or utilized the positions that we held in the budget. And if we open any additional sections, and again, Sam would need to confirm this, I believe we're over the positions that we held, if that makes sense.
I guess.
But
the only
again,
thing
like, oh, I didn't see you there, Sam.
me and being new to the district and new to the 22 budget, still getting arms around it. My understanding is that the positions that are budgeted are expected to be, as far as I know, they're being filled. And as far as I know, that is creating some capacity for some amount of students to come back. As far as I know, the amount of staffing we have that's in the budget is sufficient to meet what we expect for enrollment for the 21-22 school year, unless I hear otherwise.
Thank you, Sam.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mariah. Anyone else? Okay. Megan, keep us up to date. I know you will. It's good news that the numbers are creeping back up slowly, so we can make adjustments. That's great. Thank you for your work.
And I'll just sort of close by saying that I do anticipate that we will either reach or exceed our overall enrollment for October 1 that we had for last year, just based on the demand that I have in the queue and where we're at currently. By October 1, we should at least reach, but probably will exceed that number that we had last year. So that's also good news. Kindergarten will probably hit something like 500 or so, which is lower than our past years, but is better than last year. So.
Right, because we're still lower than we were by quite a bit in October 1st, 2019.
Yeah, and that was a big class as well. So it's sort of like a big big swing.
Got it. Stephen?
All right, then I'll be done. Just, it seems like we're about 50 per grade off in the primary schools and much less in the high schools. But then with the open enrollment, that seems like it'll go down to maybe 20 to 30. Is it fair to say that it looks like late primary is the area where there's the biggest drop off anticipated from 2020 to this year? It looks like high school is on track to be near the enrollment of October 2020, but and early primary as well. I just want to know if I'm reading that correctly.
Yeah, so just generally speaking, demand for enrollment typically is higher in lower elementary, because that's when families are most willing, if they have opportunities and choice in the matter for making moves with their families. They're more likely to do it with smaller children, or again, with early high school students, but that middle school period's a rough go. So rebounding the kids that we lost in that group might be a little bit more challenging.
Helen?
But the numbers are not too far off from where they were. So
another piece of history, Stephen, I feel like I'm filling you in on some of the stuff that I've experienced over the years, but we've generally had about 50 kids come back to the high school between 8th grade and 9th grade every year. We're not seeing that this year, but my assumption is it's because of the building project. People not wanting their kids to go from, the old Lincoln School to high school, et cetera. So I think that's, somewhat, what's the word? An idiosyncrasy this year. And that next year, I would expect to see probably a jump in kids coming back to the high school once the project's finished. And we see that in every building when we do construction, but it's even more so because of COVID and the construction. I think there's a huge dip there.
Thanks again, Helen. I bring this up because Suzanne, I think maybe in the medium term, it'll be worth the school committee taking a look back and see what the effect of COVID was on enrollments. And if there's a pocket that it really hit harder than others, for us to ask why. If it has to do with construction, if it has to do with a loss of faith at a certain point in PSB or a certain area, I think it would be good for us to do a deep dive sometime when, we're back on our feet and moving.
Yeah, that makes sense, Stephen. Yeah, those are good questions.
Suzanne, can I just say one more thing before Megan jumps off? I just want to give a really big shout out to her and her team. And when I say her and her team, it's Megan and a half FTE. You see those numbers, the 135 students in the hopper that are trying to start school on September 1. And she and her team are 1.5 people. So it is a lot of work. that she's doing to try and get these kids in. So, you know, just publicly, you all know how hard she works, but I just want to make sure that everyone is aware of it, and we give her yes, little applause.
Yeah, thank you, Erin. Thank you, Megan, for all that you do. It's not, it's certainly seasonal work in a sense, with backup towards the end there. So thank you. Good luck getting us to September 1. We appreciate it for sure.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Okay, we're going to move on, and we're moving to budget updates. And I've got Sam and Mariah up for that. We're going to start, I think we're going to just talk a little bit about 21 and then fiscal year 22, and then the American Rescue Plan. Is that what you have down?
That's what I have. Thank you.
Okay.
So I'll go in that order. I think the American Rescue Plan, the committee will have much more to say than I will, but we'll see about that. So F21, I'm pleased to report, and let's take a step back. So my first day in Brookline, I got to meet all of you in a working meeting, in a workshop, to be specific, on July 6th. And at that point, I would say 2021 was set in quicksand, not concrete. And at that point, if you all remember, what I said was, at the time I was talking, a month and a half ago or 5 weeks ago, I could tell you three things. The budget would be fully expended. That holds true. That we would fund a bailout of base to the tune of $201,645, and you all voted that. That is also still the same. What was flexible or fluid was the balance to close. And at that point, on July 6th, I had estimated, or the best information I had at my disposal indicated we were going to have roughly $600,000 to transfer to the Special Education Circuit Breaker Fund. Without those funds, we would have had almost no monies. It would have almost been fully expended and no funds to carry, which would have been not good, not good at all. As it turned out, a week later, on the 13th of July, we actually did the final close and had numbers that were set in concrete still. And the number improved. All the other numbers stayed the same, but circuit breaker, we wound up transferring $1,033,331, over $400,000 better than I had originally forecasted based on that information I had a week prior. And so ultimately, the Special Ed Circuit Breaker Special Revenue Fund, with this infusion of $1,033,000, finished the year at about $1,100,000 to start the new year, which is better than where I feared it would be. But the goal is to try to build that number up. Just for the committee's information, by statute, you can carry as much as your previous year's revenue that you receive. So we could have, if we were inclined to and had the capacity to, carry almost $2,300,000 into the new year. That wasn't possible, but that certainly is a goal to give the district maximum flexibility in future years. I'm happy to answer any questions, or I can keep going into 22, but that encapsulates the close of fiscal 21.
Any questions, comments from committee members on 21? I, for one, am happy to put it to rest, so.
Great. So moving forward, F22. And F22 is built Now, specifically on 4 pillars, and I want to speak to, I'm hitting the ground running, and I do have my arms in a global sense around the pieces of FY22, the year we're currently in. To recap, the budget for FY22 is again comprised of, well, there are 5 pillars. One's a very small pillar. One is the LEA, or the local education appropriation, what town meeting would vote. And for 22, given the pandemic, it was largely level funded, less than a 1% increase year over year. Clearly, that's not sustainable, keeping existing staff with, annual wage adjustment steps, lanes, inflation, and the like. And so the other pillars, there's a tuition materials fee, which is roughly about $500,000. That's the very small pillar. And that's recurring revenue. So is the LEA. The other 3 pillars, one of them is recurring revenue, and the other 2 are one-time revenue that are built into the FY22 budget. Circuit breaker is budgeted. So let me take a step back. Roughly $120 million is the appropriation for FY22. Roughly, I'm speaking round number, roughly $500,000 is for a tuition materials fee. $2.3 million is expected to be raised from the state for circuit breaker for high cost special education, and a portion of the transportation costs for out of district. That's new this year. Those are all expected to be recurring sources of revenue. What isn't recurring is what's called ESSER 2 and ESSER 3, otherwise known as stimulus funds. The budget was built on approximately $5 million, $1,347,668 for ESSER 2, and $3,664,807 for ESSER 3. Those monies are not expected to reoccur. And so so the total budget year over year is approximately a 5% increase. And I can speak as I sit with a reasonably high level of certainty that we will not experience a deficit in FY22. And I want to speak to the definition of a deficit versus a structural deficit. A current deficit is if we need to go for a bailout this fiscal year. And again, I want to stress, I do not see that happening in any way, shape, or form so far, and don't expect to see that. However, what I do see, assuming we spend out every bit of our stimulus funds and all the other expected budgets, is we would have what I would call a structural deficit of approximately $5 million that we would need to have raised and appropriated as a budget driver just to catch up to FY22 in FY23. My sense is you're all aware of this, but I'm just reminding you and myself, I can tell you my purpose in life and my commitment, although I can't give you a dollar figure certain, and I've shared this with Linus, my purpose is to spend as least amount of ESSER 3 money as I can and try to maximize the amount of money that can carry over, because I'll just give you a hypothetical. If I wind up spending, we wind up spending $500,000 less and leave that to carry forward in ESSER 3. You spend ESSER 2 first, then ESSER 3. Then the hill we have to climb became $1 million shorter, because not only did you not spend the $500,000 that you did, and you didn't have that in your base, but then you have the $500,000 that carry, that now you have $1 million less of a problem. And so $5 million deficit becomes a $4 million structural deficit. I hope you understand the way I'm framing it. I see some heads nodding. And again, that's my goal. And as the year progresses and we see all the staff being hired and where they sit and other uncertainties becoming certain, I can give a much more definitive answer on how steep that hill. My expectation is by the time we get a number from town hall based on the town school partnership around the first of the year, I'll have an idea exactly where we're going to finish to determine how short we are, and then have that conversation. But that's the best update I have for FY 2022. And I know I met with Mariah before the meeting and welcome her to add anything she may feel I'm missing. ESSER 3, we do have to have a community engagement discussion, and I'm working with staff, especially in the area of teaching and learning, where these ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 are primarily supporting, as well as some in Casey and student services to some degree for social emotional learning. To be able to present through Mariah and the committee to the community how we intend to utilize these funds to get community input. Although my hope is through the vetting of Mariah, through the vetting of the superintendent, through the vetting of the committee, that I think the community hopefully will see the value on the decisions being made on the usage of these funds. Again, I think that would complete my talking about FY22. My dog's trying to weigh in. I'm so sorry. You can hear him barking in the background. And then with respect to ARP, I'm going to defer to the committee because our part of ARP was ESSER 3, and the rest of ARP is landing on the town side. And I guess I feel somewhat ill-equipped to talk about that piece of it. And again, I'm happy to answer any questions, but that would complete my remarks.
Thank you, Sam. Mariah, did you want to jump in at this point? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I don't have anything to add on FY21 or 22, barring any questions. I think Sam gave a really great sort of summary of where things are at. And, there's still quite a bit to do, as he alluded to at the end, in terms of with the restructuring or the shifting around between FY21 and FY22 and the ESSER funds, and then our at the same time, our obligation to and our desire to hear from the community on stakeholder outreach around the ESSER funds. That's something that's going to come pretty quickly because we don't want to get too far into the school year. We want to be able to have people have their input as early as we can. So that'll be coming soon. And Sam and I are talking more about that. And then on the ARP money, the final funds that came to the town were slightly less than we had originally been told last summer. It's 32 million and change instead of we'd been told 34 million and change originally. And the town has received the first half of that, 16 million and a little bit. And the town school partnership is meeting this Friday at, I think it's 11 a.m. if I'm not mistaken. Yes, 11 a.m. And the goal of the meeting, I think there's a couple of different agenda items that are, if it hasn't been, I don't think it's been posted yet, but it's really to look at the revenue replacement question and sort of to what, as people may or may not know, but just as a reminder, the federal government did allow for some of the ARP funds to be used as they have a different exact words for it, but it's essentially to be able to fill into with lost revenues, but there's some structure around that. And we've been waiting to hear what the structure is and to what extent the town wants to pursue that. Because again, if you're using one-time money to fill in revenues, you would want to hopefully see those revenues rebounding. Otherwise, you're not really replacing revenues, you're just delaying the inevitable. And so looking at that analysis that's going to be done by town staff on projected revenues over the next couple of years. And then the other component of that is how we're starting to discuss how we're going to proceed around the one-time projects and getting those sort of talking about through that process a little bit. So that's all Friday morning at 11. So I don't have a lot of updates before the meeting, but hopefully we'll have some updates after that meeting.
Thank you, Mariah. So comments, questions, Andy?
So for ARPA funds, do you have the sense that like the schools will get some block allocation that we then decide how to spend, or are we going to be sort of pitching individual projects to the select board or whoever is sitting there?
I don't have any sense of that yet, Andy.
Okay, so that's kind of up for grabs, just even the basic structure, how these funds are distributed.
I don't know if it's up for grabs, but I don't have any sense of it yet.
So a decision may have been made, but if so, it hasn't been communicated to you.
I don't know if a decision's been made either. I don't, okay. I don't want to say that there's a decision made or not made. I would like to think that given that it's a town school partnership decision, and Suzanne and I are both members of town school partnership, and Sam is ex officio and Linus as well, I believe, or maybe one or the other of you is, that there wouldn't be a decision made without larger consultation across the entire committee.
Stephen.
Thanks, Suzanne. Sam, thanks for that presentation just now. And I think we all appreciate your distinction between a deficit and a structural deficit. I just want to make sure I understand though, are you discouraging us from proposing expenditures under stimulus funds altogether, or just recurrent expenditures?
I'm not discouraging either. I think we have no choice but to be largely, I mean, in a perfect world, I would rather we do one-time expenditures than recurring, because this is one-time money.
But do you discourage, what you said at some point, you'd like to see us spend as little of the ESSER funds as possible. And
this year, yes, because
go ahead.
Because these funds can carry multiple years. They can carry all the way into fiscal 24. So we'd be well served to make this money last as long as possible.
I see. Sorry, I misunderstood. Thanks for clearing that up for me.
Helen?
So to that point, my recollection last year in the budget process, we had set aside 6 unfilled positions. And I wasn't clear when Megan was talking about it. Maybe Linus can help with this. We had set aside 6 that weren't filled because of the population drop that we'd had. And do we still have those 6 in the budget, or have we filled them?
Are you talking about the same positions I asked about earlier? The ones that they said were filled? You might have missed that.
Well, that's what I wasn't clear about the answer.
Okay.
Yes, I'm asking the same question because I wasn't clear about the answer.
So I think what we'll do is we'll verify that what we saw on the sections chart were those positions that were held sort of in abeyance. I can speak for the Driscoll community that we did pull that one out of reserve in order to make the move for that particular community for that decision around 3rd grade. And that again was a broader discussion point as well, because we know that building is going to be coming back online in theory in 2 years. So we want to make sure that the building doesn't come back online empty in a sense, that we do have it somewhat filled. And so there's a lot of movement that occurs there, but whatever we can do to better position ourselves for that. But we'll get back with a solid answer on what we've actually utilized out of that particular reserve.
Okay, thank you.
Susan.
Good, thank you. And thank you, Sam. Lots of moving parts, lots to get up to speed on. So thank you for this. I very much appreciate sort of the question about the desire to minimize the cliff and the use of one-time funds. And I guess one way to think about it is, you know, having criteria for any time that we believe that we need to use one-time funds in FY22 for any ongoing expenditures. So as opposed to sort of the default being, well, we'll use some one-time funds for ongoing expenses and some not, we'll try to push as many to the next year as possible. I'm wondering if one other way we can think about the one-time funds is that we need to have a high bar for using one-time funds for any ongoing expenditures. It's not that we're not going to do it, but we have to have a high bar. We have to have really clear criteria for that. That's what I would like to see. I'm very uncomfortable with using one-time funds for ongoing expenditures. And the good news is I think we do have one-time expenditures and investments that are longer term and more strategic that we probably have been talking about for a while and want to make. So that would just be one thing, which is just flipping the way we're thinking about it. And I don't know if others agree about just having strong criteria for using one-time funds for ongoing expenses. And I think the second is just a process on our side and sort of transparent criteria so that when we bring, when we understand the staff's priorities from teaching and learning, and when the community tries to understand those priorities or our priorities, again, just that we have some pretty clear criteria for the kinds of things that we're looking for. And we had talked about this last spring, and we can probably dust off that conversation, but I think that will really help, because otherwise it's going to feel a little bit like 0G, you know, kind of where we won't really have any sort of anchors in that or any way to prioritize what I would assume and hope is going to be a lot of really good ways to use that money. I just think it'll anchor a public discussion much more solidly in our own discussion. So we may be headed down that road. I'm not quite sure what our timing is on that. But I think those criteria and anchors are important before we get too far. And I think the last thing I would say is, I think it's really important to think holistically about the town school partnership in this process and sort of how, not only how do we identify our own really solid needs, and again, sort of long-term strategic needs, but also that they not only be kind of siloed to what's right in front of us. I think there are a lot of, you know, behavioral science tells us there are a lot of decision-making flaws and errors that can come into processes like this. And I just think it's really important for us to not only have our criteria, but then harmonize that with the towns so that we're not using really, really different ways of conceptualizing this money. So I would hope that when we talk about this at the town school partnership, that it isn't kind of a big slosh of ideas, and schools' ideas are kind of in the slosh with everything else, but that we do have a little bit more, I'm not sure what the word is, but kind of coherence across the two. So I assume that's what we're talking about at town school partnership. I don't know, I haven't seen the agenda, but I just want to put that out there.
Can I respond to that, Suzanne?
Yeah, go right ahead, Mariah.
Just say about town school partnership, I hope so, but I don't know either. We'll see what how the conversation goes in terms of a rigor around the decision making. And I think that to the, you know, I'm just going to throw out examples. There may be times at which we might say, well, a project that is a one-time project for the towns might save so much in operating expenses that actually it's of benefit to the schools in the long run. So I think that there's lots of different ways for us to be thoughtful about those projects. And so that's why I don't want us to be very parochial about, you know, well, town school partnership tells us this much. It might mean that we should get more than that. It might mean that we should get less than that. We have to sort of look, as you say, Susan, in a very holistic approach of what's going to make the most sense, both in the short term and the long term on that. And then I just wanted to get one clarification from you when you were talking about having criteria for spending the one-time money. But given that we already have a vast portion of that one-time money in our operating expenses, are you talking about only the money that is not already, that would not already be allocated for current operating expenses, applying some criteria?
Well, I don't know if you remember this, but I didn't approve that part of it. Personally, I didn't approve that part of it.
I do remember that, but yes, okay.
So I didn't vote for that. I voted against that.
Yeah.
But so personally,
But
no.
since it's
I think-
happening, but since
No,
that's
no, no,
happening,
no,
yeah, okay.
Yes, no, I've ship has sailed. I'm on board. But if you're asking my personal opinion, it applies to all of it. I mean, in retrospect, it does seem to me that to the extent that we can even conceptually think through one-time things that we're sort of allocating it to, even as sort of a thought discipline at this point, I think that's important simply because we are doing one-time things in this budget. Not everything in the FY22 budget is a recurring expense. And so even if we can kind of compartmentalize conceptually, even though cash is fungible, I think that will really, really help us with discipline in go forward years.
Thank you.
Okay, Sam, thank you a lot. Welcome on board. I hear you're not full-time yet. I hope that's soon.
Not soon enough.
I just wanted to make one comment on that is, Sam is doing so much on currently 2 days a week. I think next week starting 3 days a week and then sort of trickling up from there to full-time by, is it end of September, Sam? Is that correct? So it's great to see so much happening already, even, going, as I said to Sam earlier, going from 2 days to 3 days a week is a 50% increase. So that's something to be excited about.
Well, thank you, Sam, for getting this going already. So I really do appreciate it. We all appreciate it. So it's great to have you on board. Okay, we're going to move ahead to the update on the reopening plan. And I think Dr. Guillory is going to lead the charge on this.
Thank you all so much for your time and attention this evening. So tonight, what we want to take you through is a quick update of the current thinking around the reopening for 21-22 school year. We will be sharing some additional details with you tonight, and there are four sort of buckets that we want to spend this hour in. The first bucket will be sort of an orientation or grounding from Dave Gayshak on panel 4 and what their last thinking was. David Perlman is going to take us through a policy that we'd like to bring to the committee for consideration tonight. We've asked Tricia Laham to come in and talk about a testing opportunity, or what's being called the COVID-19 testing program from the state. And then I'll close us out after we get through those pieces with just a summary of what we're thinking for reopening. So with that, David, I see you there. I'm going to pass it to you for a few minutes of the panel 4 pieces. And then following David, we'll go to David for the policy piece.
Thanks, Dr. Guillory. Good evening, everyone. Dave Gayshak, co-chair of Advisory Panel 4, Public Health, Safety, and Logistics. And so just to give a very quick update on our current thinking and recommendations, and then happy to answer questions that folks have or help inform the discussion as needed. So basically, the Panel 4 has met a few times over the course of the summer. We're going to meet again this Friday to further refine our recommendations. I want to stress that all of our recommendations are for the moment, for the start of the school year, first few weeks, while we continue to gather more data on how schools are faring with Delta and otherwise. There is, folks should expect that our recommendations will continue to be updated, potentially tightened in places, potentially loosened in places. As the school year goes on, as we try to help PSB strike the best balance between COVID mitigation and other important goals. So the very high level summary is similar to what I walked through a couple of weeks ago with the committee. Basically, we're now recommending universal indoor masking of all staff and students, regardless of grade level, regardless of vaccination status. no outdoor masking required as a default, although there may be certain situations where folks are in close proximity for extended periods of time outside that in the discretion of staff may be appropriate for limited outdoor masking, but as a general rule, we're not recommending outdoor masking. Masks are an alternative to distancing in our view and the view, I think, of many others who have studied these issues over the course of the last year. And so in a fully masked indoor environment, we are not recommending any degree of required physical distancing, except in certain limited circumstances when folks are unmasked, like any indoor meal times. But otherwise in classrooms, in hallways, focus on the masking, focus on the enhanced ventilation, and we're not making any recommendation with respect to focusing on distancing for now. And then beyond that, we do have some recommendation updates that we've discussed over the past couple of weeks regarding meal times, that those basically should continue to be outdoor whenever possible. When they are indoors, for the lower grades that are not yet vaccine eligible, we're recommending trying to maintain a 3-foot distance between individuals, which means there's necessarily, unfortunately, requires some reduction in full use of cafeteria capacity. But we think in lieu of masks in that case, it probably does make sense to have some distancing given what the initial returns with Delta. We also, for older grades, grades 7 and above that are vaccine eligible, given what we understand both from community level data and from PSB specific data as quite strong vaccine coverage across our student population, as well as town residents more generally, and state residents more generally. We are recommending not worrying about physical distancing at the upper grades for the moment. Beyond that, the remaining recommendations that we're still working on, I should say enhanced ventilation, we're recommending continuing the program that was implemented last year, which will necessarily include continuing to, measuring new spaces and making sure they're appropriately outfitted with a combination of building systems and portable HEPA filtration. But otherwise, no changes to those recommendations for indoor air quality. And then lastly, we're going to be focused this week primarily on testing and quarantine and contact tracing and isolation issues, now that we have updated guidance from DESE and DPH that I think Tricia is going to go over some of this evening, and we'll be discussing it in more depth on Friday to make some further recommendations there. But I'll just stress that the clear sense of the panel has been and continues to be that serial asymptomatic testing is not a key safety measure. It is not a way that we are with to any degree of reliability identifying asymptomatic students or staff and excluding them from buildings when they otherwise would be there. Testing up to now has always been, in our view, a validation measure to see how our actual mitigation measures are working. The data from last year was, as folks know, extremely strong in that regard. A truly de minimis number of positive tests found across thousands, potentially tens of thousands of tests taken. And so our recommendations are likely, I expect, based upon discussion to date, to not be universal widespread asymptomatic testing as was done last year. And if that's the case, folks should not take that as we're cutting a corner on safety, because that's never how testing was intended in the first place. So that's the overview. I think we're also going to discuss specifically conservatory and other special situations this Friday as well. But that's kind of a high level overview of our thinking. I will say that we are, the panel as a whole is very comfortable with where PSB is right now and headed into the school year, even despite Delta. We have in addition to all of the tools we had at our disposal last year, we have a high level of vaccination among all but our younger grades. We also, so far, the data that we've seen in Massachusetts indicates that younger children do are still not contracting quite as frequently as adults and not getting seriously ill from even Delta as frequently as certainly unvaccinated adults are. And so there's some built-in, it seems so far from the data, some built-in basis to be confident even for our folks who are too young to be vaccinated. So we're quite confident. I think that the range of views on the panel right now ranges from we're in good shape where we are to even we're being a tad conservative and we could loosen up even a bit more just to give folks a sense of where our recommendations fall in that spectrum. And we'll continue to monitor and adjust recommendations as we get into the year. But happy to answer questions anyone has or go into more detail.
Thank you, David. I really appreciate that. Val?
Hi, Dave. A quick question on asymptomatic testing. Would you think that the sense of the committee would be different if the frequency were higher and the percentage of students and staff who are opting in were greater? Would it be more effective, or would your view be the same?
I think it certainly could be a big enough change on those, either or both of those continuum could make a difference in our view. I think our view is based upon, in part, both of those things, Val. One is, given particularly the timeline that we're seeing in terms of exposure to infectiousness in Delta, a once-a-week test is really not telling us a whole lot in terms of excluding people, and particularly when it's a voluntary and opt-in. We're not getting to your other point, we're not getting either a complete test of all staff or students, nor are we getting a random sample test of the whole population or any part of it. We're getting voluntary opt-ins, which were helpful for the purpose they served last year, but are really not giving us a reliable basis to make a confident, very nuanced judgment about the community. So I would say both of those things would probably have to be different in order for us to think that testing was really moving the needle on safety as opposed to just providing some degree of validation information. There are certainly uses for testing that we'll talk about in more depth this Friday in terms of ruling out COVID in symptomatic individuals, the test to stay program that was mentioned, and I think Tricia will go into more detail on. So testing will certainly be part of, I think, the suite of tools this year, but just I don't want folks to be surprised if we're not recommending kind of widespread, everybody has the option to opt in every week, asymptomatic testing like last year.
Other comments or questions for David? Although, David, you're probably hanging around for a few minutes, right? You're always very generous with your time, so.
Happy to.
Anybody else before we, yes, Stephen.
Thanks, Suzanne, and thanks, Dave. I saw in your presentation that one of the benchmarks was at the level of triggering a discussion in panel 4. Given the trend lines, do you anticipate any further decision points coming up before? Well, it's only 2 weeks till school, but do you anticipate any, if things continue in their current trend, having to revisit any of the recommendations you've made so far?
We're always taking a look at what the available evidence is to revisit. I would say in terms of community metrics have loomed smaller and smaller in our thinking over the course of the whole year. I think we went through a natural, our experience last winter showed pretty clearly that we could navigate with appropriate mitigation measures through a very high level of community transmission with minimal in-school transmission or suspected in-school transmission. So there isn't a threshold point we're going to hit in terms of average daily cases, test positivity, et cetera, that's going to automatically trigger us at this point to rethink our approach. I think the things that are more likely to make us rethink approaches would be if we're seeing something in the information available from summer camps or summer school or from initial school starts elsewhere that make us think something's different. Significantly this year, Delta is different in the sense of it's more transmissible. It's not 10 times more transmissible. It's, depending on the estimate you read, 2 or 3 or maybe 4 times more transmissible coming from where we were before. And And so it's a difference in degree, not kind. And so I think there's nothing on the horizon right now that makes me think we're going to change anything in the next 2 weeks, but we're always looking and trying to, reevaluate based upon what's most reliable and most current.
Thanks. That's really clear and compelling.
Okay, should we have, Tricia, are you going next or is David Perlman? I'm a little confused.
It's up to you. I'm happy to go next if you would like.
I'm thinking that might be helpful. David Perlman, what do you think? Or would you like?
Oh, that's fine. Go ahead, Tricia.
Okay.
Thank you. So I was going to talk about the testing programs that DESE has put forth in the last week or two. They are talking about 3 different types of testing, and districts can choose 1, 2, or 3, any combination, all 3 of them, and can change your option midstream if there are indicators to do so. So the first option is for symptomatic testing. And the tricky part of this is we still want to really be very clear that we want people to stay home if they have symptoms. And we have to message this very carefully. And at the same time, if a staff or student is at school and becomes symptomatic, we can do a Binax Now test and get the results in 15 minutes. And then there's a pretty complicated set of criterion on how you handle that. If they have mild symptoms or more significant symptoms, if you're negative and you have mild symptoms, you can stay in school. So that's really the goal here. And the other goal is if you're positive, obviously, that we're isolating you and you're going home, and you will isolate for the 10 days of a positive case. There are some set of symptoms if you had, I think, fever, shortness of breath, a new loss of smell or taste, and muscle aches. Those symptoms would have you go home regardless of a negative test and go for a PCR test, and then consult with your pediatrician or your healthcare provider. So that's one thing, the symptomatic testing. Then there's the asymptomatic close contact test and stay. So if you are a close contact, identified as a close contact, we would still do the Binax Now test, and you could stay in school during that period instead of being home for X amount of days. There would be a Binax Now test for a minimum of 5 days, every day for 5 days. For the asymptomatic test and stay, close contact, the definition here is that you must be 3 feet apart when unmasked to the extent possible to fall into this. So students who might be unmasked at lunch, if they're closer than 3 feet, they would not fall into this category. Those students would still have to quarantine. So there's some nuance to each of these programs. So that's one little nuance to that. And then there is the routine COVID pooled testing, which is similar to what we did last year. DESE would say only people who are unvaccinated can participate in that. So it's meant for a specific group of people, not everyone in the community. And it would otherwise operate very similar to what we did last year. Pooled test, and then narrow it down if there's a positive pool, determine who is positive and deal with that. DESE has a lot of support available for all of these programs. Exactly what that looks like, I don't know. It's hard to imagine completely. They did offer supports last year, and we were aligned with a group called Meet Caregivers, who offered a lot of support to the school and helped us do the testing program we had. It was still a lot of work on the district. They're talking about a different level of support this year. So we have to figure that out as we get into the details of which plan we are recommending that we do. My personal recommendation is that we do the symptomatic testing and that we do the close contact test and stay. I do not recommend that we start off doing the routine COVID pooled testing. I think that is suggesting that we are hunting for asymptomatic people and testing them. I don't think, to me, that's not the best use of our resources. And I also feel that at any point, if we are getting information that suggests that we're seeing in-school transmission, that we are ready to pivot and go to this, to anything else that we need to do. So I wouldn't never close the door to that, but I don't think it's the place that I would suggest that we start. And I think that's in line with what Dave and panel 4 have recommended. So those are the options that they have presented to us.
Yes, some questions. Mariah.
Thanks, Trisha. This is so much. I'm having like flashbacks of everything and like, oh. So when you say support from DESE, does that mean they're paying for the additional staff that this will require? What does support mean?
That is a great question. So DESE has described, you can decide which of these things that you would like. Do you want a district level coordinator in any or all of these? An on-site specimen collector and observers, on-site testing coordinators. So it sounds like a lot of potential support. And I've begun to do the application and I said, yes, 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 we want all of that. And to figure out exactly what that looks like and how we would incorporate that into our otherwise operations, because no matter what support they're giving, and they can give a lot, there's still going to be someone in that school and probably the school nurses who are going to be responsible for a lot of who are these kids, what class are they in, where are they today, who are their parents, how do we get access to all those things. So there's a lot that is still going to require nursing support. So I think, I don't know enough about that yet to know if that will be enough support or if we will look to have additional support.
Okay, because it just feels like the logistics side of it is so huge, as you obviously know, and I'm not clear what we as a committee need to do to help you. And that's what I guess what I'm trying to get to is, do you have what you need? And if not, what should we be doing to help?
I don't know yet if we have what we need. I think it's really going to depend on when we get to the nitty gritty with DESE about what that support looks like, where they are. So a lot of the need will be hard to plan. A lot of it is random. We can't plan ahead for a symptomatic individual at school or a close contact. So are they able to swoop in and give us all the support we need at our 8 elementary schools, several BEEP sites, and the 2 high school sites as we need the help? That's hard to imagine that they can, and I don't know the details yet. So I think even with the support that DESE is giving, I think that we might need an additional support. We had hired Deb Troderman last year to kind of coordinate the testing program. I think that I would like to keep that option on the table and be able to say, if we need it, that I don't know. We talked about the town school partnership and I came in a little bit late, so I don't know the particulars of that. We did not use all the money that was allocated last year. And is that available at this point? Should we need it? I mean,
The money goes away at the end of the fiscal year. But I think it's, to your point, if we need it, then we will figure out how to make that happen. But that particular money from last year, it stays with the fiscal year.
I'm going to go to David and then Helen. David?
I'm just wondering, Trisha, whether DESE has provided some kind of timeline for when they will offer further clarity around when these resources could be available, because this has very important policy implications for attendance and how we handle students who are symptomatic, students awaiting test results.
Well, the application is due by the 20th, and I did submit, kind of almost accidentally submitted the application last evening because I didn't know when I got to the end that that was a submission. So our application is submitted. And then I had a little panic, like, well, I submitted it asking for the first two things and not the third. And can I change my mind tomorrow if I need to? And they said, yes, you can change your mind at any point in the process. So all applications are due by the 20th. And I think that right after that, they will be getting in touch with us about exactly what those supports look like.
Thank you, Helen.
Well, that's great. It sounds like they're giving more support this year than last year. Is that?
It
was that
sounds
your-
like it,
It
yes.
sounds like it. Till we get
Yeah.
it, we don't know. I get that. But to Mariah, to what you were saying about monies that weren't used last year, aren't those, what's the acronym now for it? For the monies that you accessed last year to be able to help you with these COVID related items? Is it the ESSER monies? I think ESSER 2.
This was requested, if I recall correctly, from the reserve
Those were-
fund. It
those
was
were-
town reserve fund funding. It wasn't federal funding, Helen.
Oh, it wasn't federal funding?
Correct. Or it wasn't state or federal funding. It was reserve fund.
And the town expended all of their, not.
No,
ESSER.
but the reserve fund goes with the fiscal year. So if it's not expended, it goes to
what I
free
get.
cash, et cetera. But
Yeah,
there's a
yeah,
new
no,
reserve fund for this year.
That part I get, but there was some monies that the town and the schools got that were COVID related that could be carried
Oh,
over.
the CARES money you're talking about.
Thank you.
Yes.
I couldn't remember the acronym.
Yeah, sorry. Right,
I
the
think
CARES
one
money.
of the
I believe that money is still able to be expended through, if I'm not mistaken, Susan, you meant December 31st. Sam, is that right? Of 2021, but I believe the town has fully expended those funds already.
Well, I would check on that at the town school partnership. Maybe give them a question, a heads up ahead of time so that we know.
Sure, there was a whole stack of expenses that have already been provided by the schools to the town, should there be any balance of funds. So,
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
So we already have, right, a whole bunch of stuff to claim against it, but.
Okay. Can I ask a second question?
Sure, go ahead, Helen.
Thank you. This is a different subject. Vaccinations and percentage or numbers of people who have been vaccinated. And well, let's start with that.
I don't have information on staff, how many are vaccinated. We have not asked that officially. I feel that we have offered a lot of clinics, and those last year who wanted to be vaccinated were, so I feel confident with that. I don't know how many are vaccinated. In terms of eligible students, I think we are approaching, we're hovering around 70% of students. We have a COVID clinic tomorrow evening. Only have about 25 or so people signed up for that, but 25 people, so we got that. And we will continue to offer clinics if we can get people to participate.
So my next question for the school committee is, do we consider requiring staff to be vaccinated as a I'm looking at everybody's face and nobody's making any expression, but I guess Somerville did this, I think, if I'm not mistaken, and Boston. And I'm wondering if that's not one of our strategies to make sure to keep kids in school and school running and safe or safer.
Dave, you going to register your ambivalence on the topic?
No, can I just, so I don't want to get into that right now, Helen, but
That's fine.
Could I ask Tricia a question?
Go ahead, Val.
The 70% that you mentioned, I think I've heard this on different subcommittee meetings. I just want to clarify with the full committee, that 70% is 70% of eligible students.
Correct, of eligible students, age 12 or above. And it's probably a little bit higher than that. This information is based on the information we get from the Massachusetts Immunization Registry. There can be a little bit of a delay getting that into our electronic health record system. But that's what I had earlier this week.
Okay, Helen, I think we're not trying to avoid the topic, although maybe we are, in terms of whether we require mandatory vaccinations for staff. That's what you're asking? That's what you're asking. I think.
I'm asking that for staff and students who are eligible.
And students who are eligible. And I don't believe we are prepared to, we were looking at things through policy. David, you've not brought that up, have you, in policy?
It's been a question that's asked by email and community members. It hasn't been something that we have formally discussed. We certainly could do so. I think to state the obvious, there could be some union implications. And so obviously we would need to be very thoughtful about how we approach any type of mandate that we would want to impose. And then similarly with our students, we would want to be careful about how we impose any such mandates. But yes, it's an important discussion. And do any of you have initial thoughts on that? Anyone else?
Susan and Mariah.
Mariah, you can go.
I just have a quick question, which is whether there is any discussion of that at the state level that would supersede or inform our decision at the local level.
Yeah, it's kind of why we've been stalling a little. Dr. Guillory, do you want to address that? Just what you know to date?
Sure. So actually, earlier today from the Superintendent's Association, we received word that the MTA has endorsed requiring vaccines of staff. And they certainly would like to see that on the student front as well. And then I think prior to that, the National Education Association also came out in support of vaccines for the staff. I think also the town administrator, the towns around us are also, I think, starting to have conversations about this. So the town administrator reached out to me today about a conversation he's having with his peers and colleagues that are surrounding us. So we're going to continue having a dialogue about that. But at this point, it's the information's coming in, and that's where it currently stands.
So nothing from the state level.
Nothing. No, I have not seen anything from the state as of yet.
Thank you.
I would love to ask if Val, if you've heard anything in your circles on this.
Nothing at the state level. So MTA did come out with their statement today. It involves, like our contract would, collective bargaining on the topic.
And so my question, just I'm sorry, Susan, just Val, maybe do you know this? I mean, what would collective bargaining look like for mandatory vaccination of staff? What if it's a yes or no? What are we bargaining? I'm just confused what that would look like.
So I don't know about for MTA, but I can speak to what I'm bargaining for with my union, and they're all things that we would do anyway. Time off if there are side effects, for example, from a shot, time off to get vaccinated, or opportunities to get vaccinated, equity in access to vaccines, things of that nature.
Okay, thank you. Susan, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, just a couple thoughts. One, thank you, Tricia. I agree with everything you said. And although the reserve fund transfer money does expire at the end of the year, I do think that it's pretty important for us to get the resources that we need. And so we should figure out between Melissa and Sam, where are the best places to access that money. But I think, the work that you did and that all the nurses did really to just be so thoughtful about how that money was spent, and the fact that we spent less than half of what we budgeted because of how thoughtful you were and how carefully we managed that money, I think goes a long way to making the case, not only on the merits, but also just in terms of your leadership and your management of those funds in that program. So hopefully it won't be a difficult case to make. It might be a question of which pots to access, but hopefully not a question of whether or not to do it. So I would just say to Mariah and Sam, whatever support I'm happy to provide. Again, we did present to advisory committee in December. We wrote a 2-page memo to them. I presented the request and they were amenable. They had a lot of good questions. And so hopefully that is Trisha's work and the nurses' work in managing that program so well is recognized. I mean, on the vaccines, I would just say that it's really, for me personally, it's important to kind of accelerate this discussion in whatever the right venue is to accelerate it. Obviously, there are questions of, privacy of teacher health concerns, privacy of teacher health information. I can imagine if I were a teacher and I had a medical condition I did not want everyone to know about, but it meant that I couldn't get a vaccine, I'd want some limitations around my personal health information. And yet I also know and have heard from staff, both through Panel 4 meetings and elsewhere, that there are many of our staff who want to see a mandate like their peer unions have a vaccine mandate. So I guess we can talk about this in executive session, maybe, I'm not really sure where, but I do think it's important for us to figure out, it's August 17th. And if we want to do something like a mandate, we're kind of pretty quickly closing in on that window. So I'd like us to figure out where the right place is for that conversation sooner rather than later. Yeah, I'll leave that there for right now.
Okay, thank you. Helen?
So are staff eligible to get the vaccine tomorrow at the clinic? And do they know about it?
We've publicized it pretty broadly. And yes, staff are eligible.
But did they get something in the staff email? Sort of direct to their email, because that can sometimes, help people to see, for all staff, custodians, help.
Right, I believe they did. We sent out a blast from the central office. I sent it to principals and asked them to send it to their staffs. I've sent it to nurses and asked them to reach out to individuals. So I believe so. I sent it to the health department and asked them to post it on the website. And then if people just show up tomorrow, unless there would be a crazy number of people, we would not turn anyone away.
The other thing that's really hard with all of this, we don't even know if it's even a problem. All of our staff may even be vaccinated, but we just don't know.
Well, we don't know. We do know that we've had some situations. What we do know is contact tracing and quarantine protocols are different if you're vaccinated or not. And the rules for September are pretty complex, so I don't have those fully understood, but they were different for the summer. If you were fully vaccinated, your quarantine was different than if you were not vaccinated. So if we have a situation where we are looking at what the protocol is, we will have to know if you're vaccinated. Everyone who worked this summer was not fully vaccinated. We know that, and I don't know what their status is, but I think that's a reality of our world, that some people will be vaccinated, some will not, and some for very valid reasons. So that, caution with privacy is certainly.
I'm fully in favor of privacy. However, I do think there's the public health aspect of this that we are responsible for as a school committee, to assure as much as possible that everybody who comes into the school who is eligible to be vaccinated is vaccinated. And so I agree 100% with Susan. This is not something we should be putting off. It's something we should be dealing with now.
So I believe actually that this is going to come up in our conversation in executive session, because it does have implications around bargaining. So we do have that on the agenda. So hopefully we can address it then. Other questions for Tricia or comments? Okay, David, we're going to turn it over to David Perlman. We're going to turn it over to you.
Dave Gayshock had his hand up.
Oh, David, go ahead. David Gayshock, go ahead.
Can I pop in quickly with one thing on vaccinations, Suzanne, which is for everyone out there, please, 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 if you're not vaccinated or your eligible student is not vaccinated, please, please, please get vaccinated as soon as you can. Panel 4 has re-emphasized, even, in the face of Delta, the importance of vaccines. Vaccines are effective. They do significantly reduce risk of transmission, notwithstanding what we all read in the media about breakthrough cases. And they really, really, really profoundly reduce the risk of hospitalization and death and other serious outcomes. And so please get vaccinated if you haven't already. It is well worth it, and it's our path. Anyone who wants to see loosened mask requirements and otherwise later this school year, a huge part of our path to get there is universal vaccinations. So just put in a plug for it.
Thank you, David. And as Tricia said, Tricia, if somebody needs that, how do they sign up? I'm sorry, just one more time for tomorrow's clinic.
We sent a link out with emails, and it's on the school health website, public school, Brookline School Health website. And if anyone shows up who is not able to sign up, we will take them.
And that's at Lincoln School, is it?
It's at Lincoln School at 6 o'clock tomorrow evening.
Thank you very much, Tricia. Appreciate it.
It's also posted there on our main page in the PSB News section of our main website page.
Great, thank you. Thank you. David Perlman, do you want to go forward on the mask policy?
I do, yes. So last Thursday, on August 12th, the policy subcommittee got together and we reviewed the policy that we had in place last year, which we voted on in last September, and then we rescinded it at the end of the school year. So we were working off of that policy for purposes of bringing back a similar version that reflects current thinking around the most prudent health and safety protocols for return to school in the fall. And so you have copies in your folder of last year's version as well as the current proposed version, which was voted on unanimously 3-0 by subcommittee members who are present to recommend for referral to the full committee for a possible vote today. Also present at that meeting were Susan and Dave Gayshock, who contributed their input to the policy draft that is before you. Just to go over some of the slight changes from the policy that we voted on last year. In the first paragraph, we changed a word from therefore in accordance with guidance from the CDC, DESE, and the Massachusetts Department of Public Health. That was changed to in consultation with guidance from those entities. And that change was made to allow us to be a little more flexible and nimble, because sometimes these larger agencies are not always as timely, and bureaucracy could slow them down, and they might not necessarily always agree with each other on every last detail. But we certainly want to consult with their guidance, even if we might go in a slightly different direction. So that was one change. Then another change was to the second paragraph of the policy, where we talked about having individuals wearing their masks upon arrival to and in school buildings, school transportation, and school-sponsored activities, even when social distancing is observed. The addition of the upon arrival to language is for situations such as where we have students gathering during arrival time at school outside the building in order to be brought into their respective classrooms. We may want them to be masking during those times, even if they are outdoors. So that allows our staff to have a little more flexibility around arrival and dismissal procedures. Then another modification in that paragraph is the next sentence, which now reads, if a PSB activity is hosted at a non-PSB venue, the stricter rules will apply at the non-PSV venue. That is for situations where our students might be at an event at some other place, some other physical location that we do not have direct control over. And if that other location had stricter rules than what this policy covers, our students and our staff would be required to follow those stricter rules. In other words, the rules within this policy are a minimum for our students, staff, and any individuals who are in our buildings, school transportation, or at school-sponsored activities. Then the next change, moving on to the bottom of the first page, is we loosened up the during certain outdoor activities line because the new guidance suggests that masking outdoors we may not have to be quite as rigid about. So to provide some extra discretion for our PSB staff, that now just refers to certain outdoor activities in general, as opposed to outdoor activities in physical education, where we're a little more detailed in last year's policy. And other than that, everything is the same as last year. Any questions or concerns or proposed verbiage changes? Mariah?
Thanks, David. I have a couple. Most of them are just like little things. In the very first line where it says, well, I'm looking at the marked up copy, not the other one, just when I'm referencing. When it says as schools reopen, since schools have already reopened, we probably don't need it to say as schools reopen. That was a holdover from last year. And then in the very first line of the second paragraph, I think it's arrival at, not arrival to. And then in the first paragraph of the second page, there's wording about students' family. And can we make that more inclusive wording about family and caregivers or whatever our best practice is right now. And then my two more substantive comments are the section about when face coverings are not required is the first one about taking staggered face covering breaks of less than 5 minutes under strict protocols. Is that for only indoor or is that outdoor? Because it implies it's anywhere, but were you thinking that that was indoor?
My assumption was that it would be indoor, yes, because there will be times where students are outside and can certainly have their masks off for much longer than those 5-minute staggered breaks. But if we want to be explicit about those first items applying to indoor, we could add that language.
Well, I guess my thinking about that was it was very specific for a policy, like about how it's staggered, it's less than 5 minutes, et cetera. Like, I'm not really clear on that being in the policy. The protocols could include that they're less than 5 minutes and staggered, but that could be that the superintendent and the PSB coordinator of school health services make those decisions rather than having it be articulated in the policy itself. And then while eating or drinking in a seated position, like, does it need to say eat in a seated position?
I think that one does, because the reason we added that last year was to avoid situations where students are walking around with their masks off while they're eating or drinking and going all over the place and into other environments. So if they're in a seated position, they're obviously not moving around. So this would probably be either during a group break or everyone's having a snack, or it would be in the cafeteria, presumably.
Okay, and then I'm puzzled by the third one. At the discretion of PSB educators or staff. So does that mean that face coverings are not required if you're outdoors unless they tell you they have to, or face coverings are required outdoors unless the PSB educators tell you that you don't have to wear them? Because I'm
Yeah.
assuming our default is if you're outside and this is already under like social distancing, you shouldn't have to wear a mask. So and so I guess I'm puzzled why an educator would have to affirmatively allow you to not wear a mask if you're already outdoors in a socially distanced context.
I think the idea was so that one change to the first page about upon arrival at school buildings. So that's a situation where students and individuals might be outdoors and asked to mask. So for those reasons, there could be times where at the discretion of educators and staff, we would want there to be masking during certain activities. So that's the reason to keep that line in there.
But even when social distancing is happening? Because that's the header of that bulleted section. Is face coverings are not required when appropriate social distancing is enforced, and then under these categories.
I would worry that there might be different definitions of what appropriate social distancing means. And so to provide leeway to educators and staff might be safer than just having a blanket default. But I'm open to other thoughts on that.
I think the example that came up at policy committee was like a gardening project where young students are all around an area planting together for an extended period of time. And while they're outdoors, they're in relative close proximity.
But then that wouldn't apply because social distancing isn't being enforced in that context, right? I mean, I'm just going off of what it says at the top of that header. Trish, do you have any comments on that? Like that bit?
Yeah, I think your question is good. I think my interpretation was it was really about those situations just like that, where a group of kids are outside more clustered together for an extended period of time, and an educator would say, because there's no social distance and outside is great, but it's not perfect. So if they're going to be that close together for a long period of time, the educator would be within their rights to say, for this activity, we should all be masking.
Okay, so I guess I feel more comfortable if we're saying that those things are only applying when social distancing is enforced, then they should be sort of more clearly written about if social distancing is applied, for example, outdoors, then you don't need to wear a mask. And then the last sort of more substantive comment I have on this is the part where it says the policy remains in place until rescinded by the school committee. And I vaguely remember, and you probably talked about this at policy, that we had talked about having some sort of discretion of the superintendent last spring before we ended up rescinding it. And so is our only option here to have this policy rescinded? Like, wasn't there something that we could have done where the superintendent had some discretion to, do you remember what I'm talking about? Suzanne's nodding her head. Okay, so
I agree with you, Mariah. We had said that.
Yeah, that was sort of a goal, was to have it not have to be fully rescinded or modified, but to allow the superintendent to modify it.
So we did discuss that at the most recent policy subcommittee meeting, and it appeared to be the will of the committee as well as others who are present that we just need to do a better job of staying on top of making sure that our policies are in alignment with practices, and that we as school committee members ought to be directly involved in major decisions of this nature. So rather than leaving it to the discretion of the superintendent, we take another affirmative vote when it comes time to change these restrictions.
Okay, then in that case, I definitely would amend the language about like staggered face coverings, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
And then can I just say, for the outside time, I don't think the intention is that we are necessarily asking for distance while outside. I think the language may be something like, there may be circumstances while outside where extended close contact would require a staff member to ask for masks or something like that. So it's not that often, but there could be particular circumstances where wearing a mask outside is still a good practice. I think it's very nuanced.
Well, I don't think, I hear what you're saying, Trish, and I don't think that the current language reflects that.
Right, I agree. I think
Okay.
it's confusing.
Tricia, you're suggesting that we remove the phrase when appropriate social distancing is enforced from that header?
I think so, yes.
I would support that.
Right, that would be the simplest solution. So just have that heading read, additionally, face coverings will not be required when, and then go into the current list. Because even with the staggered face covering breaks, that part is going to be falls under the strict protocols to be laid out in detail by the superintendent. So that can be further elaborated upon there.
So I think you don't want the when, right? You just go to face coverings will not be required, because then you have the while and during.
Right.
And then can we take out some of the detail about like the taking staggered face and just say like additional face coverings will not be required, like during face covering breaks, and then under strict protocols to be laid out in detail, et cetera. Take it out of the policy. Because it really isn't in the policy anyway. It's going to be up to Tricia and Linus to articulate that.
All right.
And David, did you read how that first line is going to go? I'm a little confused.
So, additionally, face coverings will not be required. And then the first bullet, while taking staggered face covering breaks under strict protocols to be laid out by the superintendent in consultation with the PSB coordinator of school health services, while eating or drinking in a seated position during certain outdoor activities at the discretion of PSB educators or staff.
Okay, got it.
Did you take out the word staggered, David, or not? Because I would hope you take out the word staggered too. I think you might have just said it. I'm not quite sure.
All right, so
Going back to
staggered
Mariah's point, do we want the language to make it more clear that the default when you're outside is no masking, and it's only when there's extended close contact that it's even up to the educators to impose that?
I would prefer that. Like it would
Yes.
say outdoors, unless unless PSB or educators or staff determine otherwise.
All right, what do others think?
Yeah, I'm okay with the changes. I like them.
All right, so what was your precise construction of that, Mariah, on the outdoor activity, the one that currently reads outdoor activities?
So, well, I think we need to, because it says additionally face coverings will not be required. And then it would be outdoors unless PSB educators or staff determine otherwise. Do you need to put something like or social distancing cannot be enforced? No, okay. Because I guess it's at their discretion. They're the ones who would determine that, right? The educators and staff. Okay.
I just had a question on that. I don't disagree with you, Mariah, but David, there were folks who raised up at policy that they wanted clearer lines. Am I misremembering that?
No, there were some who suggested that, yes.
Okay. I don't know if it was Dave Gayshaw. Dave, are you still there?
Still here. I think from Panel 4's perspective, we would recommend more flexibility to adapt as the year goes on, as opposed to locking more things into policy.
Okay, great, thanks.
Dave, just to confirm, that means you're okay with the wording?
Yes.
Okay.
Default inside, default indoor masked, except in certain circumstances, default outdoor unmasked, except in particular circumstances specified by staff.
Thanks.
All right, so now that third bullet reads outdoors unless PSB staff or educators determine otherwise at their discretion. All right.
David, would you mind reading those 3 bullets again? I'm sorry.
While taking face covering breaks under strict protocols to be laid out in detail by the superintendent in consultation with the PSB coordinator of school health services, while eating or drinking in a seated position, outdoors, unless PSB staff or educators determine otherwise at their discretion.
So do we, was there a place where we made explicit Dave's summary indoor of the default assumptions for indoor and outdoor? We have a pull-out text box, something that just it sounds like there's some agreement that that kind of proactive communication might be useful.
Well, I think the second paragraph covers that, where a face covering that completely covers the nose and mouth must be worn by all individuals upon arrival at and in school buildings, school transportation, school-sponsored activities. So we sort of have the affirmative requirements in the top half and then the exceptions later on. That's how this has been organized.
Stephen, if you're looking for a slogan, like I don't think the policy is the place to put it. I think we'll do better putting it other places.
Yeah, it sounded to me, Mariah, that you were suggesting that there be more. It's fine.
Right, any other thoughts, proposed changes?
Yeah, Helen. Helen, you're on mute.
I'm sorry, I wasn't going to say anything, but I guess I need to ask this question. You know, sometimes it takes us a week or two to meet, and if there's something, an emergency, does this policy allow for that, the superintendent, together with, in consultation with the director of health services, to change something that's there? Or is it set in stone?
We don't currently have such language, but I think that could be a good idea. What do others think?
Yeah, I actually agree. What, are you talking about the last line? The policy.
I'm
will
not
remain in
talking about
place
any
until we-
I'm not talking about any
Okay.
particular line, just in general. I'm sorry, I can't pull it up right now, so I can't read it, but I just think that we need to.
We did have some sort of, didn't we have some sort of super policy last year about COVID, which gave the superintendent discretion to do things? Remember what I'm talking about? Does that policy still stand? Do you know which one I'm talking about, David?
It does still stand, but for purposes of clarity, it might make sense to have a line about that in this one too.
Or to refer to it. Refer to the other policy.
Because that other policy wasn't rescinded, right? The one that gave the superintendent the discretion to do COVID stuff as needed.
Just working on language for.
Okay. Keeping me in suspense, David.
I'm sorry, what was your question again?
My question was the policy, the sort of overarching superintendent does what the superintendent needs to in a public health emergency, I think was the wording. That policy still stands, right? Like it hasn't gone anywhere. Okay.
That's correct.
So are you ready to
So
move?
my
this?
point was to reference that policy in this policy.
So just to address Helen's point, I was thinking we could add as a penultimate paragraph, something like, in the event of an emergency, the superintendent may temporarily amend one or more of these provisions until such time that the school committee may convene.
Perfect.
Or David, perhaps saying like in an event of an emergency, the superintendent retains the powers afforded to him in X policy. Just so we don't have to reiterate.
I like David's version because I'm not sure the omnibus COVID policy really applies to this one.
Right, just in case it doesn't, I think we might as well be explicit. Keep it safer.
I move favorable action on your policy, David. Can I do that? Or do you do that?
You can, go ahead.
Are you
All right,
moving that, Mariah? I'm confused. Are we?
I'm moving favorable action hold on, please, as amended
All right, so
tonight.
Second.
You have a second? Great. Any more comment or discussion before we vote? Okay, seeing none, we'll go ahead and vote on this policy on masking in our schools. Okay, Stephen,
Yes.
David,
yes.
Helen,
Yes.
Andy,
Yes.
Susan,
Yes.
Mariah,
Yes.
Val,
Yes.
and I vote yes as well. Thank you to David and the Policy Committee for your work on this. Okay. We are going to move on to update on the mental health services. So as always, you're welcome to stay, Tricia and David Gayshak, but you don't feel you need to.
Suzanne, wasn't Linus going to give an
Oh.
update on the general reopening?
I'm so sorry. You're absolutely right, Eddie. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Linus. Go right ahead.
No worries. I was going to wrap it in at some point. But now it's just as good a time. So thank you all again for your thoughtfulness and your thinking through this, the policies and the work thus far tonight. And again, thank you to the staff members for your hard work on that. So just as broadly as possible, as we're thinking about reopening, we want to highlight a few things that we as a system are continuing to do to ensure the safety and well-being of our students and make sure that we're carrying those practices, those best practices forward that you all have already worked on as a system. So in terms of COVID mitigation, our intentions and plans are to continue noting the ventilation upgrades that were made, but also making sure that we're using the appropriate filters as such. In those places, we're going to continue with the recommendations and the supports and supplies for the hand washing and sanitizing stations, the health attestation forms. I think Tricia talked about this a little bit. Will be sent to students and staff. You all have just voted the masking policy, so we appreciate that. The targeted support for the COVID-19 testing protocols, we'll continue to monitor and get information and updates on that as it comes through. And then Tricia's already talked about the vaccination clinic. In terms of prioritizing social emotional well-being, this is certainly a priority for our school leaders, our principals, central administration, as well as the school committee. We have made investments in those priorities, and we want to make sure that we address those needs as they present themselves, but holistically as well. So we're going to have a strong focus on the adult-student relationships. Principals are working now to ensure that we're setting up safe and positive and affirming classrooms. And then making sure that our routines and rituals are respectful and inclusive. Our communications, a big part that we're really focusing on as well is making sure that this Friday we will be taking the actions from tonight as well as the other work that's been happening in the system and make sure that we're getting that out to the community by this Friday, so that families are aware or sooner, but our goal is to have that out by Friday. We're going to reinstate the reopening website, although we'll think of a more appropriate name for that, with information about school opening for this term. And we will also be continuing the weekly community update messages as well. As far as teaching and learning, from that side division within this department, all students will have their one-to-one devices, so we're going to continue that support. You all are already aware that school is in person, full-time, 5 days a week. And remote learning, as we knew it last year, does not exist in DESE's protocols as of now. So if families are seeking virtual learning, holistically, there are resources that we can provide for that, but holistically, in terms of what we have at our disposal right now, it's in person 5 days a week. The Office of Teaching and Learning will continue to also offer professional development opportunities and resources to support our current learning management systems. We're going to make sure that we continue supporting those, as well as strongly recommend that all staff leverage the learning management systems that we currently have in place, so the platform. So at grades pre-K through 2, that's the Seesaw platform. Grades 3 through 5, that's Google Classroom. And grades 6 through 12 is the Canvas learning management system. And then as far as our performing arts, you've heard some references to that tonight. Our goal is to continue staying abreast of the current guidance and also working in conjunction with what the National Association for Music Education is putting out. And some examples that we have there are updated ventilation for larger spaces, the students that may be singing with masks on, and then the wind instruments using the appropriate types of covers. So these are the types of things, just as a snapshot, that we want to make sure that we're highlighting, but we're making sure that we have those safety mitigation resources in place. We're excited again to have our students returning. Grades, I think 1 through 9 are listed as returning on September 1st, and grades 10 through 12 are returning September 2nd. And our kindergarten students are returning by assignment on grades 1 and 2, days 1 and 2. And then I think our BEEP students are returning on the 3rd. And so September 1 and 2 will be appointments for those families. So that concludes sort of the general high level updates or information regarding reopening.
Yeah, comments, questions, Susan?
So this is great. Thank you so much, Linus. Thank you to Leslie and all of the principals and teachers and coordinators who've been working on this. It's not an easy transition to make. I have one thing which might be a technical question. I might not have heard it right. And then the other one, just we don't have to answer now, but I know is on top of people's minds. The technical thing is, I know that for quite a long time, the educational leaders in the district and the educators and parents have been working on sort of compliance with the learning management system. And I know before we had that, it was actually pretty confusing, especially for children with attention or organization issues, but quite frankly, anyone, to keep up with multiple platforms and different teachers communicating assignments in different ways, even before COVID. And one of the things that I heard pretty clearly across the board during COVID is that having consistent use, I don't know if it was mandatory or not, but just very consistent use of our LMSs, like Canvas in particular, at the older grades, was really important for kids to be able to keep on top of things and families as well. So I'm not sure if I heard a backing off of that, and I might not have, but I guess I would just sort of raise the question if there is an intent to back off of that pretty universal requirement that everyone be using the same platforms, that we maybe have a conversation about that, because I think we heard so much feedback on it last year.
So no,
Oh, sorry.
I was going to invite you there, Leslie, but no, not a backing off at all.
Okay.
So Leslie, please expound.
Sure. So Susan, are you referring to just the fact that the grade level bands use a consistent LMS. So absolutely no backing off of that. That is critical. And just, in thinking about the recommendations made by expert panel 1 and 3, they were very clear about simplicity, consistency, and making sure that the various grade level bands are using the same LMS will help us adhere to that and meet those recommendations.
Yeah, that was it. And I think there was times when maybe early days, there were teachers who might not have been quite comfortable with using an LMS and were like emailing students and doing all sorts of other things that weren't using Canvas. And it sounded like to me over the last 12 months in particular, that really did sort of land into Canvas and into the LMS and not random emails from teachers. And so I assume that's part of it as well.
Sure. I think one of the big things that we're focused on is how do we continue to support teachers in their use of the LMS. I think that is one of the biggest tasks and responsibilities of the Office of Teaching and Learning. And so just this week, Ed Tech and libraries released a number of professional development opportunities related to Canvas. Many of them are asynchronous, so that will be great because we'll share them with principals and they can allow teachers to engage in that professional development asynchronously during the opening days of school. I was going to say one other thing, I just lost my train of thought.
Well, I have another question, so I'll let you, I'll buy you a little time. And this might not be for today, but one of the number one things that I've heard consistently at panel 4 and over the course of the summer is that actually the course of this past year, in my role as chair of the task force and the panels writ large, was that people really felt that it was important that if we are asking parents to be cautious and conservative about keeping their kids home when they're sick or even sniffly, that they feel comfortable that their kids are going to get a pretty consistent level of education while they're doing that. So certainly there are situations where a child is quarantined for 14 days, or there's an immunocompromised member of the family, and there's just a concern about the child attending school for whatever reason, or whatever it is, the child traveled to a Delta hotspot or whatever it is. But there are also just those moments where you're like the parents on the bubble, like, do I send them? Do I not send them? And just that comfort level that people really did feel over the course of this past year, certainly at the high school and middle school levels, but really everywhere, that their children were going to get a good education for the days that they were out. So I guess my question is, do we have thoughts on either for episodic or for more structured periods of time, what we want to communicate to parents, both so that their kids do actually, so we have comfort ourselves that their kids are getting a consistent level of education for every school day, but also that they feel that comfort level so that they are, they're doing their part to keep the kids home when there's a sniffle or any hint of that, because that was such an important piece of the puzzle over the last year. So it would just be good if we can, and again, we're not doing an RLA, we're not doing a whole lot of things we're doing last year. And so because we're not doing all those things and we can't ask teachers to come up with multiple lesson plans all the time, I'm just curious how we're thinking about that. And if we are still working on it, that's okay too.
Sure. So I think some of that is a work in progress. I think that the LMS will certainly play a really important role in making sure that when students are out, we have the ability to communicate effectively with both students and families. So that will be a big part of things. And again, I can't stress enough just the responsibility of this office to make sure that we support educators in that endeavor. So that's really our focus now, is around having strong professional development opportunities, and then depending on the case, really urging families to reach out to our office, to Casey's office, to think about what the right opportunities might be, whether it's depending on the situation, home, hospital tutoring, whether we need to look at what is more lengthy, but the virtual schools through the Commonwealth is another option. Certainly homeschooling is an option. So, you know, we're thinking about these options, thinking about how to make sure that parents understand the options and what they have in front of them. And then if need be, talking through that with families so that they can make the best decision for their student.
Yeah, that would be great. I would really appreciate that. And just, you know, even if it's like, look, if it's a day or two, you really need to be in contact with the classroom teacher. If it's 14 days sort of thing, this is the kind of thing you should be thinking about, just so that parents have some categories to think about. Because we've even been asked, you know, can kids Zoom in if they're in quarantine for 14 days? Can they Zoom into their classroom? Or like, what is going to happen? Do they have to go to a Commonwealth virtual high school or virtual academy? So I think it's more that kind of thing. So that's great, Leslie. I know it's so hard. It's so hard. So thank you for getting some structure around that.
Sure.
Helen?
So following up on what Susan was saying, since we've had such good experience with the owls and using them in the classroom to, you know, for kids who are at home, at the high school, they used them a lot. The elementary school, they used them somewhat, I think. And especially if like half a class is out or something like that, because they need to be quarantined. You know, I would hope that we would look into, you know, creative ways of including those kids in the classroom, especially if they're not ill and, you know, have to be home because of the pandemic. So that's just a suggestion.
Yeah, just remember, Helen, that under the new schedules of testing that Tricia talked about, if they're asymptomatic and they come negative, they don't have to be home quarantined. So
if they're negative, okay.
If they're vaccinated too.
So there shouldn't be as much quarantining. I mean, that's still something that
Yeah.
Dr. is working on.
I'm
with
talking about if there were the case.
Yeah,
You know,
okay.
that flexibility is going to be an important thing here.
Yeah, I'm not sure if we can make assumptions about if there'll be more or less quarantining, because remember that we'll have a lot more close contacts than we had last year. And we'll have a lot less, I mean, well, the distancing is different, the close contacts will be different, and all of the RLA students will be back in the buildings, and there may be all kinds of things, all kinds of reasons that people were in RLA for health reasons that did not require, you know what I mean, that didn't require, it didn't hit our radar screen, I would say, for the in-person absences. So we might see more. And again, if there's a breakout during that someone's traveling on, it just seems like I don't know if we can say, like, even hazard a guess as to what percentage of kids or how many hundreds of kids on any given day won't be physically in the building.
That's fair enough, Susan, but I do think the goal, as Tricia said, was to keep as many kids in school as possible. They're safe and healthy. I understand.
Yeah, safe and healthy. But we also really, really want to message to parents, like, keep the kid home if they're sniffling, right? I think that was one of the huge lessons from last year. So I wouldn't want anything to pull away from that. And I think that was a pretty clear message from panel 4 also. So anyway.
So I'm going to Mariah and then Stephen. Mariah?
Thanks. I have two very related questions. One is sort of the same question, but for teachers. Do we have substitute teachers? You know, if a teacher needs to quarantine, are we all squared away with sort of the staffing situation on that front? And then last year, I vaguely recall that there was some sort of exemption on absentee rates or something from the state because the expected kids would be absent more. And I was curious if that is still, if that or a similar policy is being extended for this year. Just thinking about what Susan is talking about. And I think I vaguely remember that the state said that, like, you weren't considered absent if you were home, but you were learning remotely, but that doesn't apply this year. So, okay, Erin's nodding. So I'm not like totally losing my mind, right? You know what I'm talking about? So is that something that is in effect, or how is the state dealing with that? And what is our response to that? And then also for the teachers.
Yeah, so in terms of students, we actually haven't heard anything that's different than what the expectations are for normal school years in terms of attendance. So because the commissioner said, you know, students should be in school every day, 5 days a week. I imagine that there might be some additional guidance that comes out around what is considered chronic absenteeism this year. And similar to last year, if students are what is considered in attendance, similar to last year. But no, we haven't heard anything yet. And even on the meeting that we had this afternoon that Dr. Guillory alluded to, that question was asked, and no other districts had heard anything either.
Thanks. And what about the staffing bit? In terms of if teachers need to be quarantined or et cetera?
Yeah, so we haven't, so I think that's sort of the, there's the rub moment. So many of the operational or the execution portions that we need to start or have on our radar haven't been determined or set by DESE. So again, another conversation I was having with Tom Scott, the president of the Superintendent's Association, asking if this had even been discussed. And his remark was, I'm sure it's in the backgrounds, but right now those types of things have not been discussed as a statewide piece. But I would imagine probably in the next week or so, maybe right after school starts, we'll start getting some of those things. But it's we're in a wait and see moment, but it's those types of things we're thinking through right now to say what would be our position and what would we want to do or need to do.
Are you going back to per diem subs, or are you sticking with the full-time permanent subs or whatever they're called, building subs?
Right now we're looking at 3-day-a-week assignment building subs for schools to assign them a person. I think we've assigned them based on their size. So we've looked at that as a more cost beneficial approach. Certainly won't cover everything, but that will be your go-to person first if there's a sub need for the day, rather than going to the generic all-call.
But that is an option this year to have per
Yes.
diem subs, because it wasn't, if I recall, last year.
Yeah, I think we've already budgeted, and we may have already posted some of those.
Great, thanks.
Wait, I think Stephen had his hand up. David has his.
Thanks,
Stephen,
Suzanne. Yeah, I have a quick question and then a comment. Question for Leslie. So on panel 3, one of our recommendations was to promote a professional learning community around the use of technology tools for teachers. It seemed to me, or it seemed to the panel, that there was some interest around this. If we're trying to further ingrain habits around an LMS, have you considered whether the use of a professional learning community, a virtual professional learning community, might be useful?
That's a great question, and absolutely. So I just want to shout out Scott Moore, who had been thinking about this for some time. And I don't know if the chat is active here, but I'll actually share with you a link to an educator site. I can email it to you all, that it's broken down into pieces where, or sections where there are professional development opportunities, and then also a section of its own around PLCs, specifically around the use of LMSs. So we have that ready to go, and we're anxious to share that with educators as we share guidance going forward.
Great. And just a comment. Another of the recommendations from panel 3 was that going forward, the district looked for the possibility of mixing synchronous and asynchronous experiences for students. I by no means want to encourage us to get kids out of school and have virtual asynchronous experiences. I don't mean to say that at all, but it was pretty clear in panel 3 that there were some small number of families for whom virtual learning, asynchronous learning was a godsend. Kids who were bullied or were experiencing anxiety about the pandemic, or who could use automatic transcription for when they relied on lip reading otherwise. has the district, well, I don't even mean to ask a question. I just want to make a comment. I feel like I want to channel Dimitri and Selm, who was always encouraging us as a district to think about innovation. I know we're playing catch up right now and we're preparing for a dramatic return to school after a long time away, but I would love to see your office, Leslie, look into opportunities for Brookline to innovate in the area of taking some of the lessons learned from this mostly miserable year and a half and apply it going forward to see if we can give that small minority of kids some opportunities that they might not have had before we figured out that there were some technologies that benefited them. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely, Stephen. That is on our mind, and I'm anxious to talk with educators, just to have some focus groups around, what were the lessons learned and what are the pieces that we learned that we want to keep in place. I think one of the things I've heard from teachers, at least towards the end of last year, was that there were a lot of online resources, specifically the ELA department with the Calkins units of study. There were videos that could be shared with students, that would enable them to continue to do some learning. And I don't mean at home because they're quarantined, but just could support them as they do their homework. Or so, those were, I think, a big success with educators. So that's just one example, but I think I certainly want to hear from educators what pieces they want to take from last year and they would like to see continue in our planning and support through the Office of Teaching and Learning.
Thank you, Leslie. David Gaishak.
I was going to say to Mariah's point or question about subs, just to the extent the committee plans to discuss any further, either gathering information about staff vaccination status or potentially requiring vaccination, subs and volunteers may be logistically tricky pieces of the puzzle to just keep in mind. And then the other piece, just because it just came up, was just want to give from Panel 4's perspective an emphasis to the fact that we are going to, the entire school year worth of protocols around quarantine, tests, et cetera, is going to be focused on keeping, excluding kids and staff from school only when necessary. But it is really important to emphasize and support the when necessary. And to the extent DESE does not come through with better guidance on absenteeism, et cetera, I think Panel 4 would strongly suggest that the school committee and the district take a strong stance on ensuring kids don't feel like they're being penalized for staying out when they should stay out for public health reasons.
Thank you, David. I am wondering, Matt Gillis, if you would like to do a cameo appearance to tell us how we are super ready in our schools to receive our staff and our students. Are you there, Matt? He may not be.
Marty's a good.
I'm here, sorry.
Yeah.
I get distracted by family at home for a minute. I missed the last minute and a half.
Well, I just asked if you might want to do a cameo to tell us how your department's all getting ready for getting our schools open, with protocols and cleaning and all that good stuff that you do.
We're in pretty good shape. All the supplies are on hand. Custodians know how to get them out. Cleaning's going pretty well. Most of the schools are in good shape. A couple we're going to be pushing a little bit on because of summer programs that were a little more robust or in some cases ran a little longer than usual in a shortened summer. But we're going to be ready to go. I am going to have to inform staff that that the school is contemplating making vaccination mandatory and give staff a heads up. I think staff definitely need a little time to process that information and make decisions, because there is a chance that we would have some staff turnover if it was a job requirement, because some people might just say that isn't what I signed up for. So I want to give people ample notice, and I'll give them the heads up that that was part of the discussion tonight.
Okay, thanks, Matt. Thank you for all the work you're doing over the summer. Helen?
Yeah, there's one other piece, Matt, you might want to talk about the tents. Our perennial discussion of tents.
My favorite topic.
I
I'm
know.
so happy. You know, we did get a price quote for keeping the 5 tents that we have. It was about $30,000, $6,000 per tent to get us through for the 5 tents that are on site now. Wasn't much of a discount from where we were before. The owner of the company needed a decision today, and the answer was that we weren't going to keep them. If I have to call them back in the morning to do so, we can, but we did not budget for tents this year. So I guess, you know, if that's what the school committee wants and the superintendent, we can chase them down. For Linus and Sam both have experiences with tents in other towns as well. They may have some thoughts.
I guess my concern is I don't want us to be in, you know, the second week of September rushing around and saying why we didn't get them, especially if, Dave, I think I understood you correctly. We were going to try and have kids eat outside. I don't know the usage. I still don't, even after a full year of usage, it's not clear to me how well they were used in different places. And, you know, whether it's a blanket, we need one for each school or we don't, but I guess I'd like the administration to figure that out and think about it.
Yeah, Leslie?
Erin just reminded me that in your packet is the link to the website that I was speaking about for educators around professional development. So I just want to make sure you all had that.
Okay, thanks. That doesn't help us with the tent. Well, Leslie, maybe your input though from the tents. Do you have, as a former principal just a little bit ago, your thoughts on tents and the usage of tents?
You know, I think that it was really varied usage depending on schools, schedule, space. At Pierce, we certainly use them. I wouldn't say that we necessarily use them for lunch. We had some classes go outside and use them, but I know from just, you know, my principal colleagues that, you know, some wanted tents and some did not. And so, but I do feel like if I remember correctly, that we had some collective principal discussions around it and just felt that, you know, there were other expenses or other things that we would prefer to have in terms of resources. So I don't think that anyone is expecting tents. And I think if there was a principal who really was, you know, wanting tent, I think they had the opportunity to speak to that.
Thanks, Leslie. That's helpful, right, Helen?
That's very helpful. I actually, because I don't want us to go into this thinking yes or thinking no. I think we just, you know, need to respect whatever worked, you know, and not spend money where we don't need to. So thank you for that.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to move on to the update on mental health services. We have people here. Thank you, Matt, for joining in, for the work you're doing. And I think I'm turning this, who am I turning this over to? Casey?
Yep, you can turn it over to me and then I'll turn it over to Matt. I just want to give a quick intro. Thank you, Dave. Thank you, signing off. Okay, folks, just quickly before Matt gets started, I want to say how much I'm looking forward to this presentation. It will not be the first, so I just want to let the committee know that the hope is that Matt will come back pretty regularly to give updates on SEL, social emotional learning programming across the district to this committee on a somewhat regular basis. So I want to put that out there. Before Matt starts, I also just want to add a couple of points, one being that while this initiative in terms of pushing out social emotional learning programming is out of the Office of Student Services, it really is cross-departmental. Since Matt started in his new role as Assistant Director for Guidance, Clinical Services, and SEL, he's been partnering pretty closely with Leslie's office, OTL, and members of her team also to roll this out. So I wanted to just make sure folks know that SEL is not special education. It really is for all students. Want to stress that piece. And then second, especially coming off of, or really still living during a pandemic, social emotional learning curriculum is just as important as our academic curriculum. So I just want to make sure that we sort of keep those things at the forefront as we get started. And then just this last bit is I really do have to thank the school committee for supporting the addition of not one, but 9 adjustment counselors and social workers to the district who will be playing some key roles in rolling out social emotional learning in every one of our classrooms from BEEP all the way up through the high school. So I just want to thank you again for that support. With that, Matt, I'll kick it off to you to share your screen.
Awesome, thanks, Casey. All right, can folks see that?
Yes.
All right, well, thank you so much for having me join this evening. I want to name that there is a lot of information in these slides, and I'll make sure to leave some time at the end so that folks can ask any questions that they might have. To begin tonight, I want to start with some foundational information regarding our approach to SEL. I think it's really important to start there, just so that we collectively have a shared understanding about how it is that we're going to go about supporting our kids' social and emotional learning. I also want to offer some key findings from our universal screening work from last year. I think those data provide some really important insights into what it is that kids experienced last year. And those experiences, I think, provide a really a clear sense and help frame really well where our SEL priorities need to be for the current school year. And then finally, I want to offer some updates regarding, as Casey just talked about, adjustment counselors and social workers. I know that that title adjustment counselor is a new one for folks, and so I'll give some information about why it is that we're using that title. So to begin, I want to offer our SEL programming guiding principles. So these are the principles that are guiding all aspects of our SEL work. And so as Casey just referenced, we believe deeply that social emotional learning is important for all of our students. And so because of that, it's really important that all of our students are having access to experiences that are going to result in positive social and emotional development. We also believe deeply that social emotional skills just don't happen accidentally. It's really important that those skills are actively taught in order for them to be used to help support our students' functioning. We also believe that, of course, SEL skills will help improve our non-academic outcomes. For example, students being able to regulate their stress or to form healthy relationships. But we also believe that teaching SEL skills will result in improvements in academic outcomes because it will help support our students be able to engage and benefit from instruction. The home and the community are, of course, really important places for kids to develop socially and emotionally. We also believe the school, and particularly the classroom, is a really, really important context to do this work. We know that students are more likely to use skills in the context in which they learn them. So learning SEL skills in the classroom where instruction happens makes it more likely for students to be able to use these skills to help support their engagement and then, of course, to increase their learning. We also believe deeply that SEL can be this really powerful lever for educational equity, but it can only do that if we're very intentionally using an anti-racist, culturally affirming, and strength-based lens to do this work. So again, these principles are going to be foundational to all aspects of our SEL programming. I also want to offer the framework that we're using. So a framework describes the various competencies or the skills that make up social and emotional learning. In Brookline, we're using Castle's framework. And Castle describes these 5 skills that make up social and emotional learning. So self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. So this sort of represents the what of SEL. These are the skills that we're targeting for our students. Then obviously what's really important is how is it that we're going about supporting our students' social and emotional learning? And I've offered here 4 broad strategies that we're going to be using. The first is infusing SEL into teaching practices and routines. We're going to be infusing SEL into academic curriculum. We're going to be offering freestanding lessons and also providing small group and individualized interventions. To be a little bit more granular with that, to give some examples of what that work actually looks like. When we're embedding SEL into routines and practices, that looks like teachers every single day engaging in activities with their students to help support their social and emotional learning. So that might look like beginning the day or beginning a class with a community building exercise, or they may look like ending the day with an optimistic closure, for example, engaging in a gratitude practice exercise. When we're talking about embedding SEL into academic curriculum, we're talking about using academic activities as a place where kids can practice and learn SEL skills. An example of that might be reading a story and then reflecting on what the character felt. That might also look like students being offered choices in the learning, and then students having to make a good decision about how it is they're going to demonstrate their knowledge. Before I reference this idea of freestanding lessons, and so these lessons will often come from a curriculum, and they're usually designed to be about 20 or 30 minutes long, and they'll typically target one or more SEL skills. So for example, there may be a lesson that's designed to teach trust management or responsible decision making. At the end, I'm going to come back to these. Our professional development is very much going to be geared around supporting educators in their ability to embed SEL into their work. And so we'll give some examples about how it is that we're going to support educators in that work. As some folks may know, last year was the first year we engaged in universal social and emotional screening across the district. And we did that by partnering with Panorama. So we use a survey that they designed, and it's a self-report measure. So students are offering information about their own personal experiences. The measure that we use is designed for students in grades 3 to 12. You can see the various areas that it measures. And I'll get into some of this more when I'm offering some key findings from that work. What I want to name, though, is that these questions that we're asking students do not measure risk-taking behavior. There are no questions that would be indicative of any safety concerns or anything that would be indicative of a mental health diagnosis. Our screening practices involve students completing the screening at 3 time points. So they do it in the fall, the winter, and the spring, and the average completion time was 8 minutes. In the slides that come, I'm going to offer some key findings, and many of those key findings come from our spring administration. And that was done at the end of April. And you can see there that 75% of students in the district completed the survey at that time. It is completely optional. Parents are able to opt their children out of the survey, and then students can actually opt out themselves as well. In the slides that follow, I'm oftentimes offering a comparison to what students experienced last year to previous years. We have engaged in universal screening in previous years at the high school level, particularly at 9th and 10th grade. 2 years ago, as part of our 8th and 9th grade transition, we also administered a survey to 8th graders in June. And so those sources of information, although it's not a perfect comparison, do offer us some context about how student experiences last year were potentially different than their experience in previous years. The first finding that I want to highlight is around having safe adults. So we found last year that fewer students were able to identify a safe adult. This is something that is very important to us. We know that having a safe adult is one of the most protective factors that a student can have at school. And more narrowly, in a lot of our data work at the high school, we've used regression to understand how various variables contribute to academic outcomes. For example, we've looked a lot at end of year 9th grade GPA, and we know that having a safe adult at the high school level is this really powerful predictor of academic performance. So we know this matters for our kids. And it sort of makes sense with kids being out of the building more, that fewer students would be able to identify a safe adult. Positively, however, we did find that students in STEPS, students in MECO, and students in special education were more likely to be able to identify a safe adult as compared to their peers. And I think that finding is really, really important, because we know that an active ingredient in those supports are having more personalized interactions between adults and students. And oftentimes those interactions are driven through a support lens, right? And so students are very much experiencing that support and experiencing that caring. And so what's coming out of this is sort of this equation where we know that strong student-adult relationships are a consequence of, they are a function of investing time with students, and then during that time, having an explicit demonstration of caring. And so I want us to hold on to this finding at sort of the forefront of our minds as we're thinking about what all of our kids need when they return to the building on September 1st. Our second finding is sort of a related one, and it's regarding school connectedness. School connectedness measures your broader sense of how it is that you feel in your classroom and within the larger school community. And so it's measured through questions like, do you feel like you belong at school? Do you feel like others understand you? Do you feel like you matter to your peers and to your teachers? What we found last year is that students endorsed lower levels of school connectedness as compared to previous years. And we also found significant differences in school connectedness between student groups. And so to give some more information about that, we found significant differences in school connectedness for our students in STEPS, students in MECO, and for our English learners. And we also found significant discrepancies based on race, ethnicity. To be more specific with that, we found significant differences for our students who are African American or Black, students who are Latinx, and students who are Asian endorsed lower levels of connectedness than students who are white. I do want to reconcile those first two findings. And so I began by saying that students in STEPS and MECO were more likely to identify a safe adult, but here I'm describing lower levels of connectedness. When we look at the data, we find oftentimes students in STEPS and students in MECO are naming adults within those programs as their safe adult. And I think that's a beautiful comment on how amazing those programs are in supporting students. But what it also indicates, though, is that when students are in the larger school community, they're not sort of feeling connected and not feeling like they belong. And so that's a really important thing for us to address. And again, I think it highlights a really important need that our kids have regarding community when they come back into our buildings. The third finding is maybe an obvious one and one that we probably anticipated. Last year, students reported regularly feeling negative emotions more often. So more students reported regularly feeling negative emotions than in previous years. We approach our social emotional screening through something that's called the dual factor model of mental health. And so positive mental health is indicated both with the presence of positive feelings and sort of the absence of significant distress. And so that's why we measure these protective factors, including experiences of positive emotions. Students' experiences of positive emotions were generally stable throughout the year. There were some slight decreases. They weren't statistically significant, though. What we did find is that the frequency of negative emotions did increase in the winter, and they sort of stayed at similar levels into the spring. Now, I want to offer that trend is pretty typical in any given year. Living in New England, we typically see when the winter hits that people will sort of report a lower level of subjective well-being. And then when we hit the spring and the days get longer and the weather turns, people will typically report to feeling better. But what is different is just the level. So the amount of kids or the percentage of kids who are regularly reporting feeling worried and lonely, angry and sad. Now, what's important for me to name here is that I don't want to pathologize this. So this is not indicative of half of our kids meeting criteria for mental health diagnosis. These emotional reactions make a ton of sense based on what was going on last April. But even though they are normal and healthy responses to what is going on, they still have the capacity to impact a student's ability to benefit from instruction. And what we anticipate is that students are going to be bringing many of these emotional experiences into the current school year and then have additional worry about what this school year is going to look like. And so it's really, really important that we're being very proactive in supporting our students emotionally when they're coming back to school. Our final finding is regarding self-efficacy. And so self-efficacy is your belief that you can have, in this case, academic success. And we're finding significant discrepancies in self-efficacy that are emerging by third grade. And those discrepancies are based on race, ethnicity, specifically students who are African American or Black, students who are Latinx are endorsing lower levels of efficacy than our students who are Asian or white. Discrepancies based on SES, being an English learner, and also participating in STEPS, MECO, and special education. Self-efficacy is very much this transactional dynamic construct. And what I mean by that is that as learners, we all have unique assets, we all have unique needs. And those assets and needs then sort of interact with our educational environments to sort of communicate to us, yeah, we believe that we can have success, or sometimes we can doubt our ability to have success. And what we're observing here for our students who have lower levels of self-efficacy, that interaction might be resulting in them doubting their ability to have success. Now, as educators, thinking about our educational environment is very much within our locus of control. So again, it's really important that we are creating educational environments that are feeling deeply supportive, that are allowing kids to allow kids to experience challenges, but continue to believe deeply in their capacity to have success. So that was just a ton of information that I provided, but I think it provides a really helpful context for where our SEL priorities are for entering the school year. And so our district-wide priorities, and Dr. Guillory just sort of referenced this, are around building and maintaining strong adult-student relationships, creating safe, positive, and affirming classroom communities, and establishing classroom and school routines. And we believe deeply by investing in these priorities, we're going to help ensure that all of our students are emotionally and psychologically prepared to engage in learning. I'm very much on purpose using that word investing rather than spending time on these priorities, because I feel like there's going to be this really powerful return on this investment. Again, not just in our non-academic outcomes with kids feeling better, but with helping our kids be more able to fully engage in the instruction that we're providing them. And so as I highlight these priorities, I also want to talk a little bit about how it is that we're going to support educators to do this work. As Dr. Guillory just referenced, right, we are all collectively identifying this as a priority for our kids. Right. And with that priority is coming again with this investment in time. And so some investments in time that we're observing right now is, for example, during those 2 planning days that staff have before students arrive, there's going to be additional time that's allocated around SEL. And some of that will look like me going into elementary schools and providing professional development. Teachers will also have additional planning time around SEL. We've created some tools, which I'll highlight in a second, but they're going to have time to be really intentional and thoughtful for how it is that they're going to go about supporting kids socially and emotionally when they're coming back into the building. And sort of related to that, there's going to be increased time made available for teachers at the beginning of the year to build relationships, to build community, and to reestablish those routines. And then from a structural component, every school is really thinking about opportunities where kids can come together and build community. One example of that, for example, is in the middle school and in our high school, is having advisory be a place where kids are coming together and building that positive and affirming community. Casey just referenced this. So we are very much not operating in a silo when we're thinking about social and emotional learning. And so we're going to partner really closely with a variety of stakeholders, including the Office of Teaching and Learning. One thing I want to highlight that OTL is doing is they're looking at the scope and sequence of academic curriculum and very explicitly naming within that scope and sequence opportunities to build relationships and to build community. We're also OSS and OTL, we're going to partner and sort of look at these social and emotional data in relation to the academic performance data that folks have sort of seen previously, and really understand more deeply the relationship between those two sources of data, because they may provide us really powerful information about why some of these discrepancies that we're talking about exist, and that will allow us to come up with some targeted recommendations for addressing them. MECO and STEPS have both identified skill building, specifically SEL skill building, to be a priority for their students. And so this year, both programs will use a curriculum that they're going to deliver to their students weekly to help support SEL skills. And we're going to work closely with them to help support that work. We're also going to continue to engage in universal screening this school year. And this is going to be a really powerful evaluation tool for us. So we're going to be really prioritizing SEL, we're going to be prioritizing community building, relationship building, and we're going to continue to measure those things. And so we're going to know the impact this is having on our students as we continue to engage this throughout the year. So I'll be sure to come back and sort of offer updates regarding how this work is directly impacting our kids. And then finally, a really important part of any SEL programming is that we're providing educators with a really robust level of professional development. And that professional development is very much targeted to help educators embed SEL into their teaching practices and routines and curriculum. And it's really important to do that from a sustainability lens. If we're not embedding SEL into the things that teachers and educators are doing every day, SEL is going to feel like this other sort of extra thing. And it's going to be really hard to make sure that our kids are having experiences every day that's going to support their development. Versus if you're embedding SEL into teaching routines and practices and curriculum, it feels like it's a part of academic instruction. And again, that's a way that we can sort of make sure that our kids are having these important experiences every single day. And so one way that we'll go about supporting teachers with embedding this into this work is through a weekly newsletter. We started this around February of last year, and we'll continue into this school year. And the highlighter in the newsletter is meant to highlight specific strategies and activities that educators can do with their students. This year, they'll be theme-based. And so as we start the school year, they'll very much thematically be around building relationships and reestablishing connections with students. We have also built an SEL website. This is for educators, and it's meant to be a professional development website where educators can come here, and we'll update it often. They can come here and sort of do a deep dive into various aspects of SEL, and then come away with concrete tools and strategies that they can use with students in their classroom. In preparation of teachers returning, we've also developed an SEL toolkit. And so this is going to be made available to educators before their planning days. One resource I want to highlight is our SEL Master Directory. Throughout last school year, we sort of did a crowdsourcing operation where we asked educators to submit the various practices and activities that they were doing with students. And so we've compiled them all into this resource. And we've also taken information from Castle and Panorama and Second Step, so that teachers, if they're looking for a specific strategy to build relationships or to build community or to establish routines, they can come here and immediately find that resource with their students. So to sort of demo it, if teachers, for example, were interested in a 5-minute chat, they would click on the hyperlink, and they would be brought to a landing page that would give them all the information that they would need to use this strategy with their students. We've also, I offered an icon here that sort of communicates how time intensive it is regarding to both planning time and in regard to implementing it within the classroom. All right, so I know that is a ton of information that I've just thrown at folks. Before opening up to questions, I would love to offer a quick update regarding adjustment counselors. And so I know that is a new term for folks, and we've historically been using the term social worker. The reason why we're using the adjustment counselor title now is the DESE license is described as school social worker or / school adjustment counselor. And that's to reflect that a lot of people who hold that license have come from either a counseling training program or from a social work program. But the reality is that everybody who holds that license is not a licensed social worker, doesn't hold that license. And so we're just using the term adjustment counselor to be more inclusive of all the folks who are gonna fill that position. It's not at all meant to suggest a change in role. The scope of the work is going to be identical. It's just sort of reflecting the training and the license that's attached to it. And what we're really excited with adding the adjustment counselor to all of our elementary schools is that we're really going to be able to offer a more robust level of programming across all 3 tiers. And so we're going to be much better positioned to proactively address student needs and also to promote the SEL development of all of our kids. And then we're going to make sure that all of our students who need school-based counseling in order to access the curriculum will be able to do so. And so at the end of the process, we will likely have interviewed around 25 people. It's an exceptionally strong candidate pool. We have extended offers, and they've been accepted for 7 out of the 8 positions. They're not finalized yet through HR, but we're really hopeful that we're going to finalize the process in the very near future. Once we have identified all of our adjustment counselors, we're then going to match them to our respective elementary schools, sort of based on the needs of each school. And we're identifying the needs of the school by working really closely with school principals and with steps. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing. And then if any folks have any questions, I'd be more than happy to take them.
Thank you, Matt. I'm not seeing many pictures here, so I don't know if there are questions.
I see Valerie's hand is up.
Yeah.
There we go. Val, go right ahead.
Hi, Matt. Thanks for a lot of great information. Thank you for that. I didn't see any mention in your PowerPoint of gender identity, sexual orientation, and how that was going to play out in the curricula and in the educator piece of this, as well as the adjustment counselor piece. And I'm hoping that that's planned, and I'm hoping you can speak to it.
Absolutely, sure. So identity broadly is going to be a really, really important aspect to all of our SEL work. In terms of some of the data I presented, so we don't collect data regarding gender or sexual identity within that. So that's why I just didn't offer any information there regarding the panorama data for those students. But that's a really, really important part of the work that we're doing with all students, to really be thinking about identity broadly and sort of understanding and also sort of the needs of students. And so the GSA at the high school, we have had some initial conversations around some unique needs that those students might have, and we'll continue to partner with them for sure as we're engaging in this work.
Okay, I am the newest member of this committee, but I think I've probably heard more from GSA students in the last 10 days than from anybody else. So I really would encourage you and your team to look at aggressions, microaggressions, misgendering, outright bullying, and things that are happening, not just at the high school, but also at the K-8s.
David, then Mariah.
So thank you for your presentation. You are clearly offering a lot of great services. I'm just wondering what efforts will be made toward outreach so that students are aware of these programs and how they can connect with their adjustment counselor or a guidance counselor, or really anyone that's related to SEL. I was wondering if perhaps on the first day of school, particularly at the high school level, there could be some stands set up outside, just so that as students are coming in, it'll be very clear and transparent for them that these services are available.
That is a super important point. And one thing that we'll definitely be talking about with our staff is making themselves very visible. And that's within many of our interviews, we've talked about the importance of sort of making yourself visible and being part of the larger school community. We obviously don't want there to be any stigma associated with seeing your school counselor or seeing your adjustment counselor. So I think that point is a really well-received one. And I think, yeah, there's some opportunities, I think, to be really strategic for making every student know what's available to them regarding support.
Mariah, did you have your hand up?
Thanks, Matt. That was a great presentation. It's exciting to hear all this work going on and coming together. I'm really happy about it. I have a couple of questions, and one sort of ties to what David just was asking about. So my question is sort of, the universal screener focuses on grades 3 through 12, and to what extent your gleanings are applicable to K2, or how you are taking what you are doing and applying it to K2. And then my question that's related to David's bit of it is, older students might have a clear understanding of who to talk to or have that ability, but younger students and how we're enabling caregivers to understand the resources is not just the teacher, but these other grownups who are at the school that are resources for them, especially the adjustment counselors, but everyone, and even understanding who you might talk to, why. I have to be honest and say, now that they're called adjustment counselors and school counselors instead of guidance counselors and social workers, is it completely the same? Like, I'm not totally sure what the difference is, but I think parents will definitely, or caregivers will need to have some outreach themselves on that, especially because especially the younger kids, they won't have that frame of reference, or they won't even be like frontline with those adults in their lives. So could you talk a little bit about the parent outreach and then specifically the K2 applicability of what's going on?
Yep. So with the K-2 piece regarding the universal screening, we are going to try to partner with parents to sort of be the informants and sort of describing what's going on with their students. And so we're gonna work on that throughout the school year, because we understand right now there is in the preschool BEEP, they're going to have their teachers do the screening. They can sort of do that. They have smaller class sizes, so it's sort of less of a lift for them. But we'll make sure that we do have information for our K-2 students, as well as we're sort of evaluating this work. And then I think you named a really important point there. Yeah, I think it's important for the larger school community that we're really clearly defining the role of a school counselor versus an adjustment counselor, and who you go to depending on the problem. And so we'll absolutely provide that information both to schools themselves, because I think that's going to be an adjustment, of course. Then also, yeah, I think we'll have messages to the larger school community as well regarding that.
Thanks. I have two more questions. One is, you did not actually show sort of the results of the screening. Like, you didn't give quantified numbers for a lot of it about where things are at, but you said things were higher or lower or whatever. But I guess my question is, will you be setting concrete goals around sort of X percent of students feeling this way or something like that, that you can be sort of reporting on. I know you talked about showing improvement over time, but it would be helpful, I think, to know, maybe not now, but going forward, you know, where we are, where you're going, and sort of so we can see our progress and towards the goal. That would be really helpful. And then my last comment was, and you didn't talk about this either, but it was, at least I didn't see it explicitly, but the connection between SEL and physical wellness and sort of diet and exercise and all of those things, and to what extent your work is partnering with the wellness curriculum and making those connections tangible.
Yep. So I definitely, when I'm coming back, for example, after our fall administration in the winter, I think it's really important to provide some of those concrete numbers. So we're sort of seeing how things are changing over time. And then, as we talked about, I didn't reference it here, but this work is there's an intersectionality with this work across multiple departments. And so we'll absolutely involve working with wellness for sure.
And is there wellness components in your directory and so forth?
Around physical health?
Yeah, like, you know, taking breaks or whatever. Okay.
Andy and then Stephen.
Thanks, Matt. I thought that was a great presentation. I think one group of students that almost by definition is going to lack school connectedness are those coming back from the Remote Learning Academy. Wondering whether we're going to be making kind of special efforts to keep track of these students, make sure they're getting what they need in a timely way.
Yep. So what I've made available to principals, and it'll be made available to our adjustment counselors and our school counselors as well, is that we have a list of students who endorsed low levels of connectedness. So that definitely includes RLA, but also, you know, students who were hybrid and in person, and also information regarding the students who are not able to identify a safe adult. So really clearly, we know who those students are who are most concerned about, and those will be our priorities at the beginning of the school year.
Stephen. And then
thanks, Suzanne, and thanks, Matt. That was a really enlightening presentation. I have a bunch of questions, but I'm going to narrow them down to my top ones. First one, I just want to echo Mariah's last comment about presenting some sort of monitoring strategy for how we're progressing towards socio and emotional wellness in our classrooms. What's the process on determining what metrics you want to use, and what's your ETA on that? Because I think this is one of those areas that as far as I can tell, everyone in the school committee totally gets behind, but I think risks being fuzzy if we don't know exactly what our vision is and how we're moving toward it.
Yeah, so what Panorama does, the way that we are measuring skills is we're looking for students to be endorsing what they describe as a protective level of response, and to sort of be pretty granular with that. So every single question is on a 1 to 5 scale. Higher numbers are always better. And so a protective level of response would be a 4 out of 5 or a 5 out of 5 in that area.
I don't mean like that.
Well, no, so what that does is we get a summary of the percentage of students who are endorsing that protective level of response, right? And so it would be hopeful for example, is that we'd have 80% of our students would be endorsing a protected level of school connectedness, or that 80% of our students would be able to identify a safe adult. And we're sort of throwing out that number there just from an MTSS model. That would sort of be suggestive that our tier 1 programming is being really effective for the majority of our students if we sort of hit that threshold.
Okay, I think it would be helpful for me at least to see a list of what your top line indicators are and what you're measuring towards. Thanks for providing that summary. Let me just crunch 2 questions into 1 question. So, over the past few months, I spoke a lot with students about their social and emotional lives during COVID this last year. And one takeaway for me was that many students felt disconnected, in particular from their counselors. Although they liked their counselors and they felt that their interactions with them were beneficial, they felt that their counselors didn't have a lot of time for them. And a really good example of this for me was when I spoke with high school students, and they told me that their formerly named guidance counselors were also the ones responsible for class scheduling. And so they felt that in the time between that those counselors were torn between time spent scheduling, time spent in meetings with the administration, time spent in other kinds of meetings, and had very little time left for example, walk-ins. I want to raise that for two reasons. One, I just want to make sure that the way we're planning, it doesn't just look to add additional counselors, but looks to make the best possible use of our existing counseling staff. But two, I think, you know, our justification for the counselors that we're adding right now is that they're helping cope with the return from this past year and a half. They're not intended to be, I think, a long-term recurrent expenditure for the district, or not necessarily so. So I would love to hear what thinking you and the rest of the administration have put forth into thinking through how to make sure that our existing and our future counseling staff has time allocated to meet the most pressing needs of students.
Sure. So
maybe this is a question for you as well as for Casey too.
Yeah.
I think I'm going to actually ask Maria to speak a bit about what we're thinking in terms of existing school counselors and their ability to free them up really to address sort of tier 1 supports, and then the adjustment counselors and where we see them fitting into more acute needs for students.
Yeah, absolutely. So we know that, like, you know, COVID and all that has happened really highlighted, emphasized the mental health issues, you know, that we have in the district, you know, and not just in our district, but, you know, across so many schools. But this also has been something that we have recognized before COVID, right? The importance of embedding social emotional learning, teaching our students those soft skills. So not just all of those academic pieces, but we want them to graduate from high school and be competent, you know, well-rounded people. So that is really why we had this focus already, and have been working towards that. And you know, unfortunately, COVID happened, but in some respects, that also helped to really push forward and highlight the need that we absolutely had to, you know, increase the focus that we have on mental health. So with the addition of the adjustment counselors, we're able to shift, as you were saying, and the issue that you talked about with counselors being spread really thinly, doing a lot of different things. That was even a more issue at the K-8s. At the K-8s, the counselors really were all things, you know, mental health in many ways, in addition to doing a lot of administrative responsibilities. So we really wanted to focus on how can we, you know, support our students and nurture all of the social emotional learning that is really important, that is going to reinforce and grow the academic learning. And so with the adjustment counselors, we're able to shift. And if we think about the multi-tiered system of supports, and we think about you know, tier 1 is quite a large tier, right? That's our foundation, and that's where we'll be able to shift our school counselors to be able to work with all students, so that students really get to know these are our counselors, not only our adjustment counselors, but our guidance counselors, and they are, you know, not seen as only mental health, right? But they're seen as support and foundations to be able to support that that academic learning as well.
Thanks. And I should clarify, I don't want to alarm anyone. The staff you're talking about is permanent staff that we're adding, not temporary staff to deal with the COVID return, right? I see nods. Great.
Yes.
Yes, correct.
Okay. Thanks. And one quick last question for Matt. Did you happen to take a look at panel 2's recommendations around socio-emotional learning and wellness? Because I think there was a lot of really good information in there. The one that sticks out in particular was them urging us not to implement things in pieces, but rather to pick a few strong practices that we could really get behind and fully support and fund.
Yep, and I think, yep, and that's sort of reflected as we're thinking about narrowing those priorities to relationship building and community building. And so I think that that's a really important recommendation that we'll definitely want to think about and use.
Absolutely. And I worked with panel 2, tremendously throughout the year, and they, in thinking about and incorporating their recommendations and their the research that they provided and really all of the expertise in also developing and focusing the areas that were important for school counseling and social emotional learning.
Helen, did you have your hand up or no? No, okay. I just, Susan, then I'll go ahead.
Thank you. A lot of the questions that I had have already been asked, so I won't ask them again. I just want to ask a couple of specific things. First, just programmatically, to Val's question about LGBTQ, I thought we were in discussions last year about having a district-wide sort of point person or ombudsperson or someone focused on LGBTQ issues. I was just kind of curious where that went, because I know that for sure different buildings have different issues. Sometimes it's a grade level of students who is really struggling with bullying or whatnot around that, or sometimes it's a set of adults who can't quite sort of get the language right or the interventions right. So were we working towards that, or maybe I'm making that up, but I'm pretty sure we had that conversation last year.
I remember, I thought, Casey, that one of the adjustment counselors was going to the high school to be focused on LGBTQ. Is that accurate?
That is accurate, that we in our hiring are looking for candidates who have that background and expertise. But the ombudsman role is new to me, so I'm not sure where that lived last year.
I think it became because there were like very different GSA experiences across the different middle schools, and we were having things that were happening at the elementary schools that was very disparate as well, in terms of people being able to, adults in particular at the elementary level, being able to sort of appropriately handle kids who are experience gender dysphoria or other kinds of things that maybe were not taught when they were in school. I'm sort of curious where that landed.
I can do some digging and find out.
Okay. So they were great. I mean, obviously there are limitations on the data. Just on that, do we have plans to sort of, what are our plans to collect data on that in any way?
Can you be more specific with?
Well, on gender, sexuality, identity. I know there are limitations on Panorama. I'm just curious what our plans are to try to understand those experiences, how students are experiencing.
Yeah, I think we'll have to come back to you on that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So then the second thing was just sort of the student experience of all of this. I'm kind of curious, to what extent do we have ways to understand the student experience of the universal screener? What was their feedback on the screener? Or sometimes the screeners can be sort of obvious. They can ask, like, there's obviously a right answer to some of the questions, whereas there might be ways that our students are reacting to them, or even questions like, are they more likely to seek out a guidance counselor than an adjustment counselor? Just how are they reacting to some of these changes, and do we have mechanisms to gauge that?
So qualitatively, in general, students, I think they got used to it, that this is a thing that we're doing every so often. I think some students may describe, okay, these questions again, why are you asking these questions again? But overall, I think it was received pretty well by students, at least neutrally by students.
Okay. Yeah, it's interesting because I've been, okay, yeah, I guess my one recollection from panel 2 is really trying to consistently get the student experience or student take on, again, I think I was just struck maybe by adjustment counselor, like, are they more or less likely to go to an adjustment counselor, or how do they feel about some of the different ways that SEL programs and concepts are presented, which kind of brings me to my last question, which is around learning loss. I know there's a lot of discussion in sort of the educational world about, learning loss as a phrase, as sort of a deficit-based concept, how it makes students feel, how it makes parents feel, and how we might sort of think about it more as an asset-based frame of, positive character, community development, opportunities for engagement, student ownership of learning, like all those different ways that we would want kids to engage positively. So I'm curious if we, at a faculty level or a staff level, have thought through sort of where are those different messages and what are the more positive ways that we want to be sending those messages? Because I think that would, if there are ways to think about that, it might even help us at the school committee level make sure that we have our narrative right, and in the most positive, not to whitewash anything or pretend it's not there, but to really just make sure we're focusing on this in the right way. I mean, even questions around, RLA, I had an RLA student last year, but even questions about RLA students returning, in the parent group, there were a lot of, questions about loss and, and then being at a disadvantage for not having been in the buildings, which is certainly true, but it's also true that they gained a lot as well. And so just a way for, not only those integrations to happen with a positive frame, but just more holistically, how we're thinking about what students are adjusting to and what it is that we're trying to message to them about return. So anyway, if anybody has great ideas on language that you guys are coming up with, it'd be great to share with us so that we can be matching the appropriate asset-based language. But anyway, thank you.
Okay. I just have a comment. Thank you so much to Matt, Maria, and Casey for this. And we do feel it's really important, the school committee does. So I'm really excited about the additional work we'll be doing. But it also occurs to me that the bulk of the delivery of kind of the messages and the service will actually be the classroom teacher. Because there's only so many of you. There's very few of you for 7,000 students. And so we really will have to rely on the classroom teacher. And I know this may be outside of your box, but you have the skills to help the teachers be in a good place so that they can give generously. Not that they don't, they do. But teachers have had a rough year this past year and a half. They're coming back stressed for all numbers of reasons. And I don't know what services we can provide to help our teachers with good, strong wellness and mental health habits. But I don't know who else we would ask to do it because you have the expertise. So, if you can throw that into your pool of things that you think about, I think that might be helpful as well. I do worry that a lot of this comes from we need generous teachers. We need teachers to be filled, as we say, to be full so that they can give to their children, their students. And we want to make sure that their cups are full. So.
Yeah, go ahead, Matt.
I was gonna say that's super important. So adult LCL is absolutely one of our priorities. All the points you said are super well received.
Thank you.
Absolutely. They've been, regular discussions because we all know, to support our students, we have to make sure they're adults, feel supported as well. So yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you. I think we're going to call an end to this discussion because I know that you're going to come back. Well, you don't know that, but Casey has offered for you to come back.
Absolutely.
Because for a number of reasons, we want to hear how the kickoff goes with the school year. We want to be sure the public hears all of this. I know they can watch this recording, but we debated whether to have it this night or later in the fall, and we thought we'd do both if that's okay. I think Casey helped us with that. So I know you'll be back and you'll give us lots of updates on how that's going. So best of luck with the opening in just a couple of weeks. Okay, Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
We are going to, you're welcome to stay, of course, but you certainly do not need to. That's just fine. We can say goodbye. We're going to move on to subcommittees and liaison reports. We are a little behind, so if you have something to report, great. If not, we can just pass and let's see who has something to share. David and then Helen.
That's just very quickly, at the last policy subcommittee meeting, we discussed the face mask policy, which we just voted on as a full school committee. But in addition to that, there were some other issues that were raised during the course of the discussion. One of them was whether we're going to need to make an adjustment to our attendance policy, which is something that we discussed in a different context earlier tonight. We want to make sure that there is not a disincentive to being open and honest with respect to experiencing symptoms of the virus, because sometimes, particularly at the high school level, students can be essentially punished if they are absent from school. And if it's a legitimate absence due to feeling the symptoms of COVID-19, we want students to stay home and not infect their classmates and staff, or potentially be infecting them if they have it. And so it's important that we make sure that our students will not be marked absent if there's a legitimate reason for them not being there because it's illness related or potential illness related. So I hope that we're going to hear more from central office around what the procedures will be to ensure that our students who are staying home and quarantining or awaiting test results can actively participate in their scholastic activities. So that was discussed. Then in addition, we talked about whether we should be allowing building visitors. This often comes up in the context of security, but we were looking at it more through the lens of health-related safety protocols and whether we would need to have a policy in place for that, or if it would be sufficient for the superintendent to issue a set of rules around building visitors. And I just want to remind the general public that there will be upcoming policy meetings, probably very likely one more before the start of the school year, because it's going to be important that we address the issue that you brought up, Helen, around mandating vaccines for staff and students. I anticipate that there will probably need to be some negotiations around that because there are bargaining implications. But once we settle the exact order of procedures there, it would be important for the policy subcommittee to reconvene so that we could try to get a policy in place before the start of the school year, ideally. Then also some other topics that will be raised at upcoming policy meetings will include special education. There's a lot of interest in the use of pesticides and at our school grounds, as well as including organic foods in the cafeteria or more organic foods offerings. Also, there is interest in having the wellness committee get back together. They actually were supposed to do that last year, but due to the pandemic, of course, that was delayed. The wellness committee would probably be picking up on these issues around increasing the availability of organic foods. They would also be getting involved in issues of sexual identity. The Women's Commission had approached me toward the end of last year with their concern about sort of the lack of acknowledgement about sexual identity as an issue in the wellness policy and how we might be able to further codify guidelines and services for our students who are dealing with sexual identity issues, and just even for our students at large, because of course it's important for everyone to be aware of sexual identity as an important factor. And there also is interest in discussing surveillance on school grounds. So that's something that we will continue to work on at the policy level. Another issue that we will be working on is how to allocate budgets, how to allocate the school budget toward our community partners, such as adult education. And if we're going to have a common set of metrics by which to do that, there's some interest there. So certainly a lot going on, and we can't tackle all of these issues at every meeting, but I do want the public to be aware, especially those who reach out to me and to other members of the subcommittee, that we are paying attention, we are listening. These are all important issues, and they will become parts of upcoming agendas.
Thank you, David. Helen?
So we had a capital subcommittee meeting just before this meeting. I didn't have a chance to write it up, but I can sort of summarize. We talked about the ARP funding and one-time capital projects that might work, might not, and about the need for having a an update to our master plan so that it can help to inform us as to where we would like to invest these monies. There was quite a long discussion about the geothermal wells. And as you heard John Van Scoyac so eloquently talk about them at Driscoll, and the cost of them, the return on investment, the importance for the climate change to have not just net zero buildings, but buildings that are totally self-sufficient without needing, that can provide shelter if needed for the community. This is going to be a continuing conversation. The one that needs, the only one that's sort of time sensitive is the Driscoll geothermal wells. And we'll be discussing that more probably at our next capital subcommittee meeting. Hopefully we'll have, I think it's going to be hard to decide what comes first. You know, if we wait so long for the plan, the updated plan, we may have missed the opportunity for Driscoll. So there may be a need to decide that one, sort of quote unquote in a vacuum without the other items. And I think that's something we'll need to weigh as a committee, as the full committee probably. And depending on where those monies are coming from, whether it's from the ARP monies or from the infrastructure bill that hopefully will pass in the soon. Those are the big questions there. So the other piece that we also very briefly touched on were electric buses, which is in the infrastructure bill. I happened to read that today. Very clearly it says there would be $5 billion over 5 years for electric school buses. So that's something that Matt has been on top of in terms of talking with companies, and we'll continue to look forward to being able to access some of those monies. Also talked about the high school deferred maintenance, things that didn't make it, and things that didn't make it into the budget for the high school renovation. That got value engineered out. Susan very eloquently talked about how they're working very diligently to make sure that those things are what can be included is included. I guess that's, and we talked about Charlie's backlog of repair and maintenance, mini CIP items to the tune of about 17.5 million, which we're going to get a better listing of soon. Did I leave something out, anybody? I think that sort of sums up what happened at our meeting. It was a robust meeting.
I'm sure. Yep, thank you. Anyone else have any report out? Yeah, Stephen.
Really briefly, as long as we were talking about sustainability in our schools, I don't know if you all remember in May, a team captained by TNM Christie Electress and social studies teacher Roger Grande got a proposal accepted by the Brookline Farm to School Institute, and so they are going along with Sasha Palmer and Britt Stevens and Pierce School Guidance Counselor Tim Hintz and I at the beginning of October to the Institute to hopefully take home some policy ideas as well as some activities that might improve that around the themes of food security, sustainability, and farm to school in cafeterias. So that's a little piece of happy news.
Yeah, great. Anyone else? Okay. Any new business anybody wants to bring up? Okay, so we're going to move into I'm going to propose executive session. I do want to welcome Val. This is your first, I believe it's your first school committee meeting, right?
It is.
Yeah, so welcome. You can see how they go.
Thank you
Yeah.
very much.
Yeah, we're delighted to have you on board. I move to meet in executive session pursuant to Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter 30A, Section 21A, for the following purposes. Purpose 3, to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining with the Brookline Educators Union, BEU Unit A and Unit B, if an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the bargaining and litigating position of the public body and the chair so declares. And purpose 7, to review and approve executive session minutes from the following meeting, July 26, 2021. Do I have a second to the motion?
Yes, ready.
Thank you, Andy. And we'll vote. And we'll then go into executive session. We will not be coming back to open session when we are done. Stephen,
Yes.
David,
Yes.
Helen,
Yes.
Andy,
Yes.
Susan,
Yes.
Mariah,
Yes.
Val,
Yes.
and I vote yes as well. I think Robin sent us the link to the executive session. So Robin, we have to go to that, right?
Yes, there is another link.
Okay, so we'll see everybody on the other side through the link. And best of luck to everybody on the opening of schools that is coming up in just a couple of weeks. So that's exciting. It's very exciting. Okay, see you in just a minute.